Going to call the meeting, August 30th meeting of the Tiverton Town Council to order. Madam Clerk, if you could do. Oh, I was following the order, but we can pledge allegiance first. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Councillor Cook? Here. Councillor Janick?
Present.
Councillor Edwards?
Present.
Councillor Burk?
Present.
Councillor Vieira?
Here.
Councillors Perry and Councillors deMedeiros are absent.
Thank you. So we have two orders of business tonight, and I just want to speak to them first. One is the Town Solicitor discussion and possible vote on proposed new Tiverton Code of Ordinance regarding short-term rentals for council questions, concerns, and any modifications, and to forward to the Planning Board for their review and recommendations. Then the second is the National Grid Pole Petition for down by Fogland Beach on 3 Rod Way. Please know that tonight is simply a workshop. No final decisions will be made tonight. What we will do tonight is talk amongst ourselves, get feedback to the document that was provided us by our solicitors after a meeting that was a public meeting that was held earlier in the summer, where we provided some input. And once we get a final draft version that we are comfortable with, we will forward it to the Planning Board. They will review, they will have public hearings, and then send us back a version that, or their suggestions and recommendations, and then we will again have public hearings on this ordinance later on, probably, I'm guessing, not before late October, or maybe November-ish. So it is a very public process. It has been a very public process. And we will take some comments tonight after the council members get a chance to give some input. I will ask that people be brief. You'll be limited to 3 minutes. If you come up to speak, if you have provided written input, we have all that. We've been reviewing it. We will continue to review it, and you are more than welcome to also provide us written input instead of commenting at this meeting. That's fine with us. We always, all of us, read everything that we get and take it into consideration to the best of our ability. I want to thank our solicitor, Mike Marcello, and his colleague, Nicole. And Nicole, I apologize, I forget your last name. We only met once on Zoom.
Andrew Scavenge.
Andrew Scavenge, thank you. And I'd like if one of you can walk us through the memo and the document.
So as you recall, this was drafted at the request of the council after there was a little bit of a concern earlier in the year, and based upon a ruling or opinion that I had give that short-term rentals are not currently permitted in any zone. So in the town of Tiverton, so it's a use not listed, and therefore it is it's not a hotel. It doesn't fit the definition of hotel. It doesn't fit the definition of a bed and breakfast. So therefore, there really is no definition of short-term rental. It is a relatively new phenomenon with the internet. And so long story short, in the absence of an ordinance, the council asked us to draft an ordinance that would provide some oversight and regulation of short-term rentals within the town. And we, after looking at other towns and other methods of regulation, we felt the best way to do so would be to amend the zoning code. And that's what we did. So this is an amendment to the zoning code of the town of Tiverton. Under state law, once the council wants to change the zoning code, it goes to the planning board for their recommendation. It's not, the planning board doesn't decide it whether it's a good or bad ordinance. They just give a recommendation or give comments as improvements. Once we get their recommendation, it will come back to us. We will then put it on our agenda. It'll be advertised for 3 weeks, and then at the conclusion of that 3-week period, at that meeting, you could either adopt it, not adopt it. And again, there's nothing in the ordinance book right now. So this, the council could decide to do nothing if they want. If they do decide to do nothing, however, I just want to emphasize that it has been determined that short-term rentals are uses not permitted under our zoning code. So I know everyone knows that it happens. Everyone knows that it does occur in this town. But technically, when we had a neighbor complain, we actually terminated a short-term rental because it's a use not permitted under our current zoning code. So that's the little background. So we begin with a definition of short-term rental under Article 2 in the zoning code. And it's basically any rental of part or all of a premises, a dwelling unit, for a fee by anyone other than the owner for a period of 28 consecutive calendar days or less. So it's not, 30 days would be a pure rental. 2 months would be a rental, but anything less than 28 days would be a short-term rental, excuse me. The next thing is where we allow it is we amend the use table. And you'll see that short-term rentals would be permitted in the various zones. R30 by a special use permit, R40 in ours refers to residential. R30 is a special use permit, R40 special use permit, thank you. R60 special use permit, R80 special use permit. We left the village commercial and the general commercial, we left that we were looking for some guidance from the council as to whether we were going to allow it by special use permit or permitted as a matter of right. That's why the SP is highlighted. Highway commercial is not permitted. Waterfront, it would be permitted by special use, would not be permitted in an industrial zone, or I think OS is open space, not permitted there. How we regulate it would be for an application, so it would go before the zoning board after an application for a special use permit application. That permit would be granted by the zoning board subject to public hearing. We did that for a couple purposes. One, it's a very public process. The neighbors within 200 feet of that residence or wherever it happens to be would get notice, so it would be no surprise to the neighborhood if someone was renting their property for a short-term rental. One of the provisions in here, which I know has generated a lot of comment, again, this is up to the council, but it is typical in some of these short-term rental ordinances, that in order to qualify as a short-term rental, the person who is renting it, or the owner, must at least reside in that premises for at least 260 days, calendar days. And the purpose of that is that prevents people from just buying property, again, one of the purposes, it prevents people from just buying a piece of property and keep on renting it. So if you have a house in a residential zone, like if you live in a residential neighborhood, you buy it, and you keep on renting it on a week to basis, less than 28 days, you're really operating a business in a residential zone. That's really a business. So that's why we have the owner occupied. That number is purely, 260 days is a number that's common, but you could increase the number, you could decrease the number. That's up to the council. Again, this is a legislative act, so you can determine what you think is appropriate, or if you believe you want to get rid of that requirement, that's up to you. We just gave you what we thought other towns and how other towns regulate it. Then it requires a registration, and you apply for through the building officials, the zoning official, and the application sets forth different responsibilities and a fee of $100 for the application, and that application needs to be submitted every year. And that's a way of keeping, so the neighbors and the town knows who's renting and who's actually having short-term rentals within their community. It requires that the owner or the person who's engaged in short-term rental have a local representative or a property management company whom the town, so to be designated as someone that we could talk to or call in if there's a problem. If there's a party or there's a nuisance in the neighborhood that neighbors complain about, we need to have somebody that we can contact so that we can say, hey, you got a problem here. And so that's part of the application process. Doesn't allow for nuisances, which is kind of standard. And then it also, from a safety perspective, if you're going to have a short-term rental, you're going to have an inspection by the fire marshal, the building official, to make sure there's enough, smoke detectors and whatnot, because you're technically renting out for very short periods of time, so it's a safety issue. So they would get involved in making sure that the fire code was being met and whatnot. And then just disclosure information that must, if you're putting on one of these websites, it's, it must indicate that this was been approved by the town and, can't operate it without the approval. And then the enforcement of it is left to the zoning enforcement officer. So it's all kind of laid out there. I don't go through chapter and verse, but I know this has been posted and it's been out there, so I know this is the second round for the council to see it. But that's kind of the general lay of the land for this ordinance.
Thank you. To organize this a bit, I'm just going to go from member to member and see what comments. And Donna, I know you brought this to our attention originally, I believe. So do you have any comments, questions?
Well, I originally brought it to the attention of the council due to the Essex Library not being allowed to rent it. Historic building from Landmark would be a special type of person. The Landmark is a specialized, very different abodes throughout the world, and I think it would have been a very positive thing for Tiverton because we have such a beautiful historic building and people would want to come and spend their money and enjoy Tiverton. I didn't find that it would be a problem, but then calling it a hotel, I don't know if I agree with that. I also was interested in seeing what everybody else has for ordinances, and I'm beginning to think we're kind of going over the top here. As I went through everything, I was thinking, well, why are we doing this and why are we doing that? They have home insurance. They have, if they're going to overload their septic system, that's going to cost them $30,000 to replace it. I mean, I really don't know if the tentacles of the government need to be in everything in that respect. I also know that with using these platforms, that the tax is collected by the platforms, so we don't have to really worry about that. But I guess it's up to the council as to how far they want to go or how restrictive they want to be. I do have to agree with Mrs. Giemund, Carol Giemund. She's very knowledgeable in town, very well respected. She owned Century 21 and now she's with Top Sales. And I do have to agree with her. Maybe a little bit we're making a mountain out of a molehill, but once again, sometimes less is more. And if things don't work out with less, then maybe we could take the next step, but I don't believe there's been a lot of problems in town, unless I'm just being naive. But we'll see what the rest of the council has to say on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Cook, Councilor Janick.
So first I heard of this was when Donna did bring this up because of the Essex Library. But I started to hear from some of our residents who have Airbnbs next to them and describing parties on Tuesday nights and fireworks and parking issues. So I think that we have a responsibility to ensure that their home lives are not disrupted by people who are renting out. I agree with Mrs. Cook. I think some of this is a little bit over the top. I think that we need to look at it and make some adjustments. I think that we need to look at our zoning, we need to look at our ordinances, but I think we need to make sure that we protect both the people who are doing business, especially those who are doing business and have been doing it safely and soundly and not impacting negatively in the neighborhood, because I think it can bring in some business into our community. As far as people living in the facility, I think that that's one of the areas that we're quite over the top on. I do agree that we need to have someone local who can be a person of contact, someone who the police can go to, the fire marshal can go to, if need be, because some of these homes that are being rented are repeat offenders, and then we deal with those. And the ones who are not, then they, should be able to continue. So, my
Thank you.
2 cents.
Thank you, Counselor Janick. Counselor Edwards?
Well, to be clear, this is not a phenomenon that's unique to Tiverton, and we're not the only town that has recognized it and has enacted an ordinance to deal with it. Most of the communities in Rhode Island have. We haven't up till now. When you look at a lot of the other communities, what they have developed and approved, we're not that much different than they are. For instance, Portsmouth wants an owner to be in residence for, I think it's 265 days. Without an ordinance and without it being in our zoning, if there is a problem, then a neighbor has very little horsepower to do anything about it. He can call the police, he can call us, but without an ordinance, what do you do? There's not much you can do. Are they a big problem? Not that I'm aware of, but if they do become one, and we don't have an ordinance, we're not going to fare very well in that situation. Right now, they're not allowed. I think the general consensus is we want to allow them, but if we do that, we have to have some regulations on how they're going to operate, how we're going to let them operate, what their responsibilities are going to be. So we're not trying to outlaw them or anything like that. We're just trying to, regulate them and, yes, control them to some extent. One big issue, especially if these happen in North Tiverton, will be parking. A lot of the other towns, they definitely address parking. They definitely address how many occupants there are going to be. They definitely address whether the septic system will adequately handle, you've got 3 bedrooms, you normally have 6 people, they arrive with 12. Could it happen? Sure it can happen. Will the septic system support that? Probably not. So there's a lot of things that are part of this that need to be addressed.
Thank you. Counselor Vieira?
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I'll be short and sweet here. I think that I am against short-term rentals, but I'm also against a lot of these regulations that are being proposed. So I'm going to take the stance that we need to address this issue as a community once and for all. But I don't want to micromanage a system or a business that's already been here and is active. So I think we're kind of here to compromise on some issues and to work together and to move this, I don't want to say it a business, but this situation forward to everyone. And I look forward to working with all of you and appreciate everyone being here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Vieira. Town Administrator, I would like to hear if you have thoughts on this.
I have a couple of thoughts, just to kind of put some of this in perspective a little bit, that it wasn't just the Essex Library that brought this to fruition. And people aren't gonna believe this, but COVID had a lot to do with this. As a lot of the venues for either weddings, parties, or whatever had diminished their capacities, people found that there were other venues available, and we were inundated with a number of very high profile type houses that had enough rooms that were rented out for like $8,000 a day for the weekend. And we had some expansive parties that were dealing with weddings that were either downsized to 75 people instead of 200. And that's the genesis of where some of this started. I mean, short-term rentals have been around for a real long time. Ever since Airbnb came out, or VRBO, or there are a number of other ones that are out there, but even before even the internet was out there, people had rented their properties out. And we never really had those types of issues. Now that, you know, the market is kind of back for some of these entertainment venues to go back to having those kind of facilities and events, we have not seen the problem that we saw at the beginning of COVID. So is it something that needs to be regulated? I think there are some things that we should be looking at. I don't know all the answers. I know that we're still researching some of the other cities and towns as to who were confronted with the very same issues that we were confronted with. So it is a process that we're gonna have to go through to try to find something that will work for both sides of this, because I don't think our intent at all is to tell people they can't utilize their properties in the manner that they've been accustomed to. But at the same token, we need to have at least some protections for the neighborhoods and the neighbors of some of these particular properties.
Thank you. I just have a few comments, and if any counselors have specific language they want to share, because I know that our solicitor would like to have something concrete to be able to say, for us to say, well, keep that in, don't keep that in, at least for a next draft. I mean, we don't need to send it to the planning board immediately. We can work through several drafts of it if we need to. And then, you know, at some point, probably long before the next big rental season starts, to be fair to folks, have a final product for public hearing and then a final decision. Does that sound reasonable, Mike, to you? So with that, I'm going to be very specific for most of my comments. And I do believe that we do need to have some type of an ordinance that regulates the use of short-term rentals, if for no other reason to clarify that those businesses that are currently operating are not illegal businesses, because I don't think we want to shut anyone down simply because we didn't have something in place. And also to protect those neighbors who may or may not want to have something next to them. It doesn't mean they necessarily will have veto power, but at least they'll have some way to be able to address issues that may arise from a short-term rental. And obviously that can happen from a long-term rental too. We all know that. So, you know, that's certainly an issue. In terms of some particular feedback, so Mike, if you can turn to, and I numbered the pages weren't numbered, so this is what I have is page 5, but that's counting your memo. So it's actually the second page of the draft ordinance. The top, owner occupancy of dwelling unit, and I know there's concerns about 260 days, and we can talk about that, or even if it should be owner occupied. But I just want to clarify. So if I have a piece of property that has an external structure that is built, you know, bathroom and everything like that, it meets the code regulations for it just to be part of my property, whether it's an in-law place or the like. And I lived in either the main house or that property, I meet that requirement.
Correct.
Yes, okay.
Because it says a dwelling unit or at least the same parcel, so yes.
And the same would go, and I know we don't have many triple deckers here, but if I had a triple decker or even two-floor, two-family home, or what I grew up calling a double house, here it's called a duplex, I could live in half of that, either upstairs or downstairs, or in one half or the other, side by side, and that would meet that, okay.
As it's currently written, yes.
Okay. Then on item 3, my concern there is I think it's important to have a local representative. I'm not so sure that that person needs to live in Tiverton myself. I think that as long as they can respond to the needs of primarily the people who are staying there as quickly as possible within a reasonable amount of time, as well as respond to any emergencies that might come up respond to either of our chiefs with any emergencies that they may need addressed, or the zoning or other officials. I just want to look at what constitutes a reason. We have 12 hours here in terms of response. I think it would be helpful at least to, I mean, if, like, I'll give an example. If I'm this person, you don't want to call me to fix your plumbing, I'm going to call somebody who's an expert in that to fix the plumbing. So I can do that remotely, but I do think we need to have something reasonable there, and not necessarily that they live in Tiverton. And we can talk about what that might mean after we get through this. I am concerned in the nuisance section about fireworks and open flames, outdoor fires. I'm not sure that I want to regulate it, but I just want to note that I have concern of how that could go awry at times, especially the fireworks. I certainly, even now, we have fireworks going off in town when, you know, you don't expect them to, and, you know, we get lots of feedback from folks, especially folks with sensitive dogs, who, you know, they go off. I have a neighbor across the street who has a very sensitive dog, and, you know, fireworks could be 3 or 4 streets over, and that dog goes crazy. Events and parties, and I think Bobby Martin may have given us some decent language. I thank you, Bobby. He had sent in some suggestions, and he talks about events and parties except as may be expressly approved by the town by way of a license or permit pursuant to our current code of ordinances. So perhaps if we can, oh, that is in there. What is he? He highlighted that language. I was thinking it was new, but. Oh, he thinks it should be removed. Ah, I see. I'm not sure if I agree with that. I read that too fast. The information to be supplied, I think, you know, we can look at whether or not that's too much, but some of it is probably necessary. I'd want to look at, and I don't know, you know, I know the thing to do is not ask a question that you don't know the answer to, but I don't know the answer to this. What, if any, kind of records are hotels required to provide? I'm looking at number 8 on the 3rd page of the actual ordinance.
Hotels are licensed separately, right? So it's a different license
Right.
for a hotel, that's why. So, I mean, that certainly can be taken out, but it just kind of gives the town an idea of how much, no one really knows how many rental properties, short-term renters you have in town. We obviously have some, we don't know how many, so, and that's language that can be changed at any time, but hotels, obviously, hotels report their gross revenues on a monthly basis to the state because they pay a hotel tax.
Okay. And then down further, number 10A, the advertisements. So the zoning official shall impose a fine of up to $500 a day for each date of advertisement in violation of this section. Is this meaning when I don't advertise? Or if I fail to include the other required information in my advertisement?
If you don't have the required information under 7.
Okay, so what happens if I just decide not to put it up anywhere, but I'm still gonna do a short-term rental and I don't put any information out there? I fly under the radar.
So you just do it by word of mouth?
Yep.
That's a loophole, obviously, yeah. But obviously, you would think that if you're doing it by word of mouth, you're probably not getting a stranger, right? You might get a friend of a friend, or, you know, when you put it online, you're getting anybody. You get someone from California, Massachusetts, you know, another town around. Or if you're just doing a neighbor, a coworker, it's a little bit more closed group, I guess.
Okay.
That is a, but that would,
Yeah.
that's a loophole, obviously.
So, and just some other pieces for thought as we work our way through this. Obviously, nobody is supposed to use their premises for illegal purposes, but we want to make sure that we have a handle on that. Off-street parking, as others have mentioned, I think that's critical, and again, especially in the north end of town, to address that. And it doesn't mean there can't be, but I think we have to figure out how to make it work, and I know other cities and towns have done that, both here in Rhode Island as well as nationally and internationally. I do want to point out too that the impact, you know, some folks see this as just something that should and can be done. I think it's also important to recognize, and there's data out there that shows this, that the more short-term rentals take over the market in any location, the harder and harder it is to have an adequate affordable housing stock in that location. So we also, I think, have to balance that because, you know, we want to make sure we have quality affordable housing because whether or not we understand this, you know, a lot of the people who work in our restaurants, a lot of the people who are first responders, especially if they're just entering into those jobs, they can't necessarily afford a home in Tiverton sometimes or, you know, nearby, and they have to drive distances to get here. So I think we have to think about that impact. So my two other points I have, is there any point where we can outright ban someone from doing it because of habitual offenses? Do we have anything like that in here?
I think we give them I think if they are violation for more than, I think it's three times, I think we ban them for at least a year.
Right, but,
I mean, that's, again, that's a discretionary.
yeah,
number.
okay. And then the last piece, and I think I had mentioned, two other pieces, I'm sorry. One is how, and Chris, I look to you to think about this, I don't have an answer, it's a question. How, if any, and maybe some of those who are in the audience who already rent have looked at how to do this and we're willing to listen to that. Beach passes. Those beach passes can only be provided to residences, and it may be something that we talk to Stu as an incentive for some of the operators if we can provide them with a method to get I know this year we didn't do it, but a method to get a seasonal pass to use for their rental.
So that's a topic that we would have to undertake. I know other communities do that. But we, you know, obviously had this the first year of doing what we did for the beach fees this year, and we limit it to just town residences. Short-term rentals were not considered to be residents, so they would be paying daily fees.
Right.
But we don't have a non-resident fee for the whatever period, whether it be for a week or a month or for the season. It's something we probably should entertain.
Okay. And then my last piece that I really think we need to articulate in zoning, and I think it comes up in this because I know that there's at least one site, campgrounds. I don't see campgrounds as, at least in some areas of town, as something that should be in those areas of town. And I know I spoke with the town administrator earlier this week of one facility that their method for disposing, at least on the Airbnb site where I read it, of disposing for human waste probably violates some codes.
It violates our own code.
Yes.
Yeah, we do have the zoning official taking a look at it, but obviously these are things that kind of escaped us. And they do need to be, if it is going to be entertained, there does need to be an appropriate ISDS system or sewage system that is regulated by the Department of Environmental Management that is granted approval. And it's something we will take a look at. So I agree that there are some other constraints that we probably haven't ever entertained because a lot of this is new to us, is, you know, trying to look at what we're being confronted with. So, you know, when we look at this, you know, one of the things I kind of considered as we went through it was, and it hasn't been formulated yet, do we do this in two separate groups? Do we do it for home owner occupied, even if it is for a limited period, and those who just straight out buy businesses for the strictly rental, all 100% rental? Do we do this in two different components and regulate it a little bit differently than a homeowner occupied one versus a full-time short-term rental unit?
Okay. Nicole, since you, I know, did a lot of the research on this, do you have anything you want to add before we open up for some comments?
No, I think all the comments have been helpful so far.
Great.
And it's good to know we can cut back on some of it as needed. Whatever wants to be deleted, we can get rid of that. I think it's easy to do with a draft, so I'm glad that it's still in draft form and, yeah, happy to make any changes or entertain any other ideas as well.
Great, thank you. So again, I will open up for some public input. Again, this is a workshop. We are not making any final decisions tonight. Final decisions will not be made for several months from now. This will go through some iterations before we send a version to the planning board. The planning board will do their work, come back to us with recommendations, and then we'll hold additional public hearings on whatever version we put out at that point, and take feedback and go from there. So I have a couple people down here. What I'm going to suggest is this. I know that probably not everybody has been to meetings and they're not aware of our process here. We do have a sign-up sheet. I'm not going to suggest that you flock up there right now to sign up. Joan has another name that was just put up there. We'll get to that one. I'm going to go through my list here. And then if you do wish to speak and I haven't called your name, you can come up. I'm going to ask Joan to put one of these out front, so to make it easier for you, so that when somebody comes up, they can write their, please print your name to make it easier to, because I know if I write my name, you can't read it. Please print your name to make it easier for the clerks to be able to capture that. And again, we are limiting folks to 3 minutes. If someone has already made the major points that you want to make, feel free to just say, hey, I agree with what Maureen just said. Whatever the case might be, or I disagree with what they said and here's why. Just want to try to make this as orderly as possible, but also be able to obtain as much feedback as we can. So the first person I have here is Nancy Papagno. Nancy? Did I say it right? Papagno, I'm sorry, Nancy. And I know you introduced yourself to me last fall. So can you come up to the mic possibly? Thank you. Took me a minute to recognize you there because it was in the dark most of the time.
Hello, I'm not used to a mic. Is this okay? or
Just
do I
pull
have
it
to
a
get
little closer if you can. Yes, thank you.
3 minutes. I thought I knew the impetus for this discussion because a friend of mine told me about a problem she was having on her street. And it was very simply an owner who did not occupy a house, who promoted in his listing parties, and the street had to deal with 7 or 8 cars and parties, I don't know if it was a Tuesday, but parties every week. And the noise and the nuisance, which I guess is a legal term. And she would complain to me and say, you do it the right way. And let me preface everything after I've already started. I'm an Airbnb superhost. That means I'm good. I get good reviews. I've been doing it for 4 years. I love it because I'm a social person and I need the income. I didn't think I needed it, but I'm retired, I'm on a pension. So I've been doing this for 5 seasons, 4 years. I'm owner occupied. I do this in my house. I have a studio apartment, although I don't have a stove, so someone won't run after me for having an in-law apartment. I have separate entrance, but I actually have 2 egresses. I have smoke and CO2 alarms, and I'm almost always home. That isn't really true, but I live in the house 365 days, technically. I allow 1 car. In 2 instances in 5 summers, I've had people who did not tell me upon inquiring that they had a second car. I don't know, I can't remember, and it doesn't matter how I dealt with it. And it's tricky because I don't like people parking on the street. They don't want to park on the street. I think parking is an issue or would be an issue. So I agree with that, but I don't have that issue. I specifically say no parties. I specifically say this is a very quiet neighborhood, and I live within seeing distance of Nanaquacket, so sound carries very easily. I'm paranoid about noise, and I say you have to be quiet. Most of my guests are so quiet I don't even know they're there. I don't know they're leaving, and it really kind of makes me crazy, but they respect that. So when I hear about the noise and the 7 cars, it's not that I was incredulous, I believed it, and I thought it was obnoxious, and I think I hate colloquialisms, but I think it's the bad apple. I've done mine, I enjoy it. and I don't make a lot of money. I think I'm the third lowest of all the prices that I've looked on Airbnb. But I need that money, and I bring money to Tiverton. So,
Thank
I
you.
don't know if that was 3
No,
minutes.
that was perfect. Let me just, if you can hang on 1 second. I don't need you to tell exactly where you live, but just to get a sense from especially from the parking situation, where in town generally?
I live off, I always say, I live on Nanaquacket Pond, but I live on the poor side. I've been there for 17 years, almost to the day, and so I don't live on that side. I live on this side, but I have beautiful sunsets, and I love my little originally nicotine-covered cottage that I rehabbed. And my studio apartment, most people say they really love it. It's much larger than a hotel room. And there's a personal touch with Airbnb. There are some bad things. They have to walk across my lawn. I had one woman cancel because she just broke her hip. She was bummed out because she didn't think she could do it, but please describe to me how and I told her, you have to go down a slight slope. I knew that was gonna kill it. And I said, I don't feel very comfortable either. And I always have people come before dark, and there are a few who don't make it from New York, for instance, because I want to lead them down to the studio so they can, and I say, there's no bloodletting here. You cannot fall, you have to look at all my solar lights and my lights. And, take it easy and use your phone, and I encourage them to use flashlights. But, I don't want to have any accidents. I don't want to have any septic issues. You made me think when you brought that up. Oh, my God, but.
Great.
I mean,
Thank you.
so-
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Can I s-
Yep.
yes. Nancy?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Bill. Nice to meet
Hi.
you. The way this ordinance would be written, would she have to hire? She sounds like a hands-on,
She would meet the requirements, she's owner-occupied, basically.
she wouldn't have to hire a property manager because she's
No,
a
I
resident
didn't
and on the
read it that-
property.
I will tell you, if I might, when I read in the Seconic Times that one of the proposals was that I would have to tell the town of Tiverton how many rentals I had and how much money I made.
Yeah, that's,
I was amazed at that, and I thought, I wish I knew a small business person in town and asked, do you have to tell Tiverton how much money you make? I really bristled at that. I know these were proposals, I know it was a reporter, but,
It wouldn't be an automatic disclosure, it would be, it's not automatic. In other words, if it's a town requested, that's, as it's currently written, if the town's requested it. And I think that's kind of a way to enforcement. If you have a house where there's a lot of problems, it's a way, that's, but it does say that, but it's upon request, it's not automatic. It's not like you
Okay,
have to report every
okay,
week. But
thank
again,
you.
that's something that's,
that allays
Could be
some of
taken
my
out,
fears.
yeah.
I mean, almost all my neighbors know that I do this. I told them way back. I have a little sign that says guest parking, which is kind of cute. It's a play school sandwich board. So I don't hide it, but no one sees them. No one talks, I mean, they don't make any noise.
Nancy, can I ask you a
Sure.
couple questions? Process-wise, and I agree with you, you don't really need to report your income to us. That's the last thing I want as a community.
Good.
Because I'm assuming that you're already, as part of your, whatever agreements you have through the internet, that you're paying your 7% or whatever it is to the state. So,
Absolutely. One of the things I like about Airbnb is they do all of that
so
for
it's
me.
all done for you.
It's all done for me, so I can go to a tax accountant and say, this is how much money I made, and I'm sure it says how much went to Rhode
Yep.
Island and to the towns.
And my other question is geared towards insurance. When you did this, I'm assuming you seem like a very reasonable,
did.
very
I
bright
asked-
individual. You want to protect your own investment, you want to make sure you're
Absolutely.
covered. So does the Airbnb or whatever those entities, do they require that you have appropriate insurance when you sign up with them?
No, but I asked my insurance people,
Okay,
and the one thing I was told is, do not serve breakfast. You can have the food there if you want to, or
right.
not. So I never serve as much as a cup of coffee. They make the coffee, they eat my
So
muffins.
it's amenities available, but you don't do it as a service?
And I
Okay.
don't give, right,
Okay, I get it.
exactly.
Why don't you do it as a service?
Because it
should
probably
be-
winds up being more
Because
restaurant or
nice.
some other, B&B.
Well, if I serve them something and they had food poisoning, I think
Oh.
Right.
Right.
I'm legally, I don't know how you can,
Differentiate, yeah.
differentiate it, but,
That would make it a bread and breakfast,
Right.
and it would make it a better, right.
which would be another
exactly,
regulation
Exactly.
that we do regulate. We do regulate better.
I appreciate
And I
your
don't want to take time from other
No,
people.
thank you, thank you very much.
Other side of this pond.
As you're driving past Evelyn's. Next person I have is Christine Bandoni. Thank you, Christine. How are you?
Hey, how are you? Hi, my
thank you.
name's Christine Bandoni, and our rental is on Main Road, sort of down near Nanaquacket area. We originally purchased the house to hold it in reserve for elder care for our family, and we use the short-term rental to cover expenses until that need arises. We live next door in a relatively small house, so we often use the short-term rental also for our own family when they visit. We highly value our neighbors and make sure that our guests are completely respectful of them, of their privacy and their right to peaceful enjoyment. We do pay all of our state taxes. The rental service does collect that, but if we do a rental where it's a word of mouth, then you have to pay it yourself. So we do that every month and have been in compliance for many years. And we basically are respectfully asking that you continue to allow us on our current path without requiring us to live in the house, because we live next door and we don't live in the house.
And that's a separate,
It's a separate
Lot,
lot,
yeah.
separate home, yes.
okay.
So it's
Well,
not part
as
of the
written right now,
parcel.
it's not, that's not considered as written right now.
Correct,
Yeah, yeah, okay.
right. It's not part of the parcel. You mentioned beach passes. That's nice, but people just pay the daily fee. I've never had a complaint. Just FYI. Sounds nice, but. And we don't host events. We don't advertise events or parties, and we specifically, have a very strict limit on number of people that are allowed. Parking is all off-street, and no events, no parties.
It's all short-term.
It is all short-term, yeah.
Is there, just to educate myself, is there obviously the summer's a popular time. What happens in the winter? Do you still have?
Yeah, winter is not really very popular, although there are some people that come. It may be someone's relocating to the area, and they just want to stay someplace local, and they're looking at buying a house. Family reunions, just visiting family, and just not wanting to stay. Maybe their family has a small house as well, and they just don't have enough, or they want to be someplace separate and don't want to stay. So, yeah, but
Generally,
not very busy.
Are the rentals generally, a week, 2 weeks, or?
Yeah, usually about a week to 2 weeks. Yeah, right now I have someone in there for the month of September, but usually around a week to 2 weeks. It's the most typical.
The safety issues that were mentioned in this
Yes.
proposed ordinance,
Mhm.
would you have an issue with any of these safety issues?
No,
So your major issue is residing for a specific amount of days?
correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you, Christine.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Holly Demaro?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I have it all written down, so. My husband and I have been doing short-term rentals for about 12 years in Tiverton, and have had no adverse issues with neighbors or other people that we know who rent in this fashion. So I just wonder how many recorded issues there are with, negative approaches. I'd like you to consider a different point of view. I think my husband and I would like you to consider short-term rentals as an asset to the town. Tiverton's a unique place, not Newport, and I say that, we used to live in Newport, and it's a very different location. And in our experience, people that rent from us are not party people. I understand there are some issues, but that has not been our experience. They're family-oriented, and since we don't have local accommodations in Tiverton to speak of, these properties are ideal for visiting family, members of local residents. We've had people looking to buy a house in our area and rent from us. And people who generally come here for nature and they like the beach and bring their kayaks. And we've also had guests in our house who are renovating their house for the winter. So we rent short-term in the summer, and then we try and find people for 8 months in the winter, which we've been successful in doing. Some are through sabbatical homes, so they're professors coming into this area and teaching at Brown or UMass Dartmouth, or people, that have purchased a home and are waiting to close and want to experience Tiverton. And most importantly, our guests use local services. Our experience is, we had one guest who would bicycle every morning to pick up roadside eggs. He lived in Cambridge, and he just couldn't believe that you could drop money into a tin and pick up a dozen eggs. We have people who walk to Coastal Roasters every morning for breakfast. We have other guests in Tiverton that go out to dinner every night. So if we have a week or two booking, that's some business for the local restaurants. At the Boathouse, the Black Goose, Four Corners Grill, Groundswell, Evelyn's, just to name a few. Some guests prefer to shop at local markets like Tom's and the Cheese Wheel and local farmsteads, Bridgeport Seafood, again, quite a few others, and bring food back and prepare it in our kitchen, because it's a 3-bedroom house with a full kitchen. We have enough room. Guests bring their bicycles, kayaks. They enjoy walking trails, and quite a few other of these passive activities. We find that a lot of people come in the summer for that sort of thing. They're looking for a natural experience. They're from the city, and while they're doing this, they're bringing, we think, much needed revenue to this town. We've enjoyed it. We have a property. We live down in near Adamsville. This property is on Riverside Drive, near the bridge, and so we're close. If there's ever any issue, we've had, things happen, and we've responded quite quickly. Also, the neighbors in this neighborhood where we rent all have our numbers, and we're, we've never had a complaint from our neighbors. It's not an easy business, but it does augment our retirement and, supports the house. Our overhead includes local people who clean, cut grass, they maintain the property, plumbers, electricians, et cetera. The overhead consists of paying state and town taxes. Our considerable improvement to the properties have increased our real estate tax contribution, and we all know that Tiverton taxes are one of the highest, so this helps. We'd like you to support this kind of passive revenue-producing enterprise rather than placing burdensome and what we consider some redundant restrictions. There is a building code that our house is up to the building code and the fire code and all that. Some of the restrictions, I think, if you enacted them, we'd be unable to justify continuing to rent. So I would just say in closing, I think it'd be considerable revenue loss to the townspeople who depend on this income for their yearly survival, the shops, the restaurants. And we'd like to see the town supporting our business and not thwarting this effort. And I say that because we do feel that a lot of the ordinances are overreaching. You know, the income reporting, and we do not live in, you know, at this location. So that would be an issue for us. But
Thank you. It's kind of an unusual request, but, and maybe Mike will tell me I can't do it in open meeting. We've heard a couple people talk about eliminating, and certainly some of the counselors eliminating or cutting back on the owner occupancy requirement that is in the draft. In general, just a sense of the body here, and I know this is not representative of everyone, and I just popped in my head, if we did something opposed to that. So I think one of my concerns is, because this has happened elsewhere, is when companies come in and purchase a whole bunch of properties and then rent those out. And they really have no connection to the community. Because I want to be clear that I've not heard anybody on this council, the town administrator, our staff say that we should get rid of short-term rentals. We do see them as a value. And part of that value was the recognition that, oh, right now, you're not covered by the zoning, so it's really not a legal business. Now, we're not going to go out and tell everybody to stop. We didn't do that because we want to make sure we have a thoughtful process. But so if we included in an ordinance some language that would limit the number of short-term rentals any one individual could have. Yes? No? What do you mean by that, if you don't mind? Limit? So it would depend. We could say no more than 2, no more than 10. You know, for me, 10 would be high, but it's really intended to reduce the number of situations where, as I said, large companies who really have no connection to the town.
Mike, can I ask you a clarifying question?
Certainly.
You're not saying limiting the number of actual rent, it's the number of units that you're allowed to.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Per
Yes.
owner,
Per
Yes.
owner.
per owner.
Yes.
Thank you.
So it's just a thought. Feel free to send us your thoughts on that. Just wanted to throw it out there as something to consider. Whether or not we can actually do that, we'd have to look at that too. And so I appreciate your comments. And just to be clear, and correct me if I'm wrong, the 8 months out of the year that you rent this to a professor or whomever, that's not covered under the short term. That would be just regular rental. Yeah, so
Which is
this has
fine.
nothing to do with that. This only has to do with the short-term aspects.
Okay.
Can I just ask one quick question? Do you have off-street parking on Riverside?
We do. I know that, you know, it varies, but we have three parking spaces.
Do you ever have people come with more vehicles?
No, and we always mention that we have 3 and that's it, because it's, you know, it's tight down there and
And that's specifically the area that I had heard complaints about because people did not have off-street parking and would come with a number of vehicles, and so that was their complaint.
oh,
But that
okay.
doesn't seem to be an issue for you.
No, we haven't, and we do have parking, so that works out.
Great, thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Maureen O'Mahara? Greetings, Maureen.
Maureen Umahara, live at 60 Woodland Circle in Tiverton, but we recently purchased a house this year, planning to do Airbnb, but we hadn't started yet. And then we heard all of the issues popping up, and we said, oh, no. But I do appreciate that it is important to have an ordinance, so I appreciate you guys talking about that. I think I think all perspectives need to be looked at in terms of, you know, the homeowners as well as the people that are living nearby. I think I'm reiterating some of the things that people have said. I think if things are working, it sounds like colloquially I've heard people say there haven't really been that many complaints. I don't know if there's been actual data. I've just heard people saying that. They'd be curious to say, because if there's not that many complaints, it sounds like things are going okay right now. So to go to the extreme of all the things that were added to this, it seems like, I think, Donna's idea of starting at a lower level and then adding it, if you need to, higher levels of ordinances, I think that was a great idea. But I think it is important, as Debbie said, to make sure that there isn't issues with the neighbors and that there is some kind of, process that's very clear, and that it does get indicated, when the person is renting. So I think that's helpful. The thing that I had concern about was the 260 days restriction, because we bought this house with the plan. We actually only live 5 minutes away. We're there almost every day anyway, checking on the place, and not everybody knows me, but my husband and I are very conscientious neighbors as it is, and so we had that plan as well. And from what I've heard of people that came up here already, they're very conscientious down, there hasn't been issues. So I appreciate actually when I came in here to hear some of the feedback that council have already been looking at both sides in terms of not being too extreme in the restrictions, but also be having the balance. So I appreciate that you've already been open-minded about looking at all sides. I don't want to have too many repeats of what people said, but I do think it is important to look at what it's going to entail to do some of the requirements. How much is it going to cost the town? Is it worth it doing some of these things? So I think not only concern about the homeowner, but also just the town. How much effort will we have to hire people to do some of these things? Will it cost the town? Will it be worth it in the long run? So I think it's good to look at all the options in terms of that, to see what will work, what it actually will entail. But I think that, and I think as people have said before, that obviously there's pros and cons to Airbnbs, but there is a benefit to the town. We don't have hotels, and it's helpful to have business come in. A lot of people talk about taxes, and so having people come in, like I know I already had a plan of, I'm gonna have a list of all businesses in town so that people can know which ones to go to, and it can really help the town in that way, in that they're coming here, and they can enjoy a lot of things that maybe they didn't even know about, that because the town has a lot of great things. So I don't want to reiterate what everybody said, but I do want to appreciate that your open-mindedness and being able to discuss that. But one concern I did have was I tried to contact people who already had Airbnbs. Just thought, oh my gosh, I didn't know about this until a couple days ago. They probably know it. And a lot of people some people I didn't hear back from, some people said, I didn't know about this. So I hope that there's a continued dialogue so that the people that are part of that have more awareness, because I wasn't aware until a couple days ago about this, and maybe have more time to discuss it and talk to the owners as well, because I don't think everybody's aware.
No, that's good feedback. It was connected to our agenda. Because this was not a traditional public hearing, it was not posted as a public hearing, and on our webpage, you will see some other ordinances that are ready for public hearing, so those are posted as public hearings. Perhaps we've done this with some special projects before, and I don't know, again, I'm looking to Mike, if we can ask Dave to put a section where any documents related to this, and people can look at, and they can always, and put a note that they can always contact you, contact one of us. It's always good to have it as much as possible by email, because it documents it for us, and I get forgetful sometimes. So it's good to have that in writing, so that's always helpful. That's a great suggestion.
Okay.
Does anybody have a concern about
I didn't have a chance to do an
Dave doing that?
email, so I'm hoping that
Yeah,
I'll still have
no,
time
that's-
later.
oh, yeah,
to do
yeah,
a more
because,
concise-
as I said,
I didn't want to do
this
a
is
whole
really a
long-
first draft.
Yeah.
This is gonna go through the next few months, we'll be doing this, and up until the date that we do or don't pass an ordinance is, when that feedback is possible.
Okay,
So,
well, thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Blair Moore, I think it is. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, my name is Blair Moore. My family and I run a small guest stay experience here in Tiverton. So we are a family business. There's 5 of us that operate this, and we have a team of 6 people that are all local people that we employ jobs. They help us clean, they help us turn over all of the cottages, they help us make beds, set those experiences up. Everything was great. I think the only 2 things that we were really concerned about was the owner occupied. We have 2 cottages that are personally our own that we have renovated. They were all in disrepair when we got them. We renovated them sustainably. We put a lot of reclaimed materials back in. I also run a design firm, so That's part of what I do. Everything is up to code in our properties. My mom is the one who handles everything. So she is the one, anytime that there is an issue, maybe an extra car or something like that, she is there immediately. And she has phone numbers to everyone, is always in connection, always texting people. I do think it's really important that there is someone either in Tiverton or something around the space, because you never know what's going to happen. And I think, for us, it's really imperative for our neighbors that there's no noise, there's no issues, that we're handling that. And that is something that she does really, really, really well, as well as my dad and my brother and my sister and myself. So that's something that's really important for us. In terms of the rubbish that you talk about, that's great, because we don't even put out the rubbish. We actually pick up every single one of our guests' rubbish and we sort it at our farm, because that is a sustainable issue that I have personally. And I know when someone gets there and they're with their family, they may not remember what type of rubbish is going, and is getting recycled. So that's something that's really important. And then all of the food scraps go to our chickens, which we then feed, our eggs go to the guests. So it is a family business. We do not make a ton of money off of it, but we love, love, love doing it. We have I'm the numbers person, so like the average that our guest is spending in Tiverton is $500 per stay that they're staying. That's a huge amount of jobs that will be taken away if we have to live in each one of these places for 8 months. I think that's it. Yeah, we have a concierge service, so we're on call 24/7. Any issues? I agree with no events. I don't think there should be events. We have done a couple of small weddings that were 15 people, one 25-person, a 30-person, and they're just an annoyance for us, and honestly, we don't even want to do them. So we just were trying to help, I think, during COVID, with everyone being like, I can't have a big wedding, and we're scrambling. So that was just something, but we're all on board with that. Also, 40% of our business is done in the off season. Unlike Holly, who is amazing, by the way, and a fantastic host. We have a lot of our guests, because we're prevalent on social media, do come and stay with us during the off season and buy at the Cheese Wheel every time, the Groundswell every time. They go out to dinner at Four Corners Grill. It's a really, they love this area and this community, and I think we just want to share that with them. Do we want to get huge? Absolutely not. I think we like how small and petite we are, so I'm okay with that. And then with the monetary aspect of it, if you wanted to do something that was separate to owner occupied at a different percentage, and then you wanted to charge people that owned different houses a percentage, kind of like a hotel tax, that is a pass on to the guest. So I think that is fine. And if that's benefiting Tiverton, great, that's all for it. So I think those are our concerns, and yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
If I'm connecting the name right, I believe your family also has a conservation easement on part of the property?
We do. Well, that's not.
Different property?
Different property.
Different
That's
property.
where we live.
Yes.
And it's still disheveled.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. We are
No,
going
it's
to
wonderful.
renovate it. It's just,
And thank you for that.
Yes.
Because it has helped to preserve a beautiful
it is
scenic
beautiful.
view
Yep.
For Tiverton and for our guests.
I will be having my wedding there next year, so I hope that's okay. But that's it. Yeah, I will come for a permit. That's totally, I knew that already. Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. We love that property. We're going to renovate it. We've already been, working sustainably to conserve a lot of the building materials there, so that's really important for us. But yeah, that won't become a guest rental.
Yeah, I was the
ours.
treasurer of the land trust when we finalized that, so.
That's
thank
great, yeah. That's where our chickens lay the eggs, so, yeah.
you. Questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You have a name written over there, or two, I believe? Yeah, just read it off.
Looks like Kristen Sylvia.
Kristen Sylvia? Yep, here she comes. And then if we could get, yeah. Oh, with a pen, yeah, okay. Welcome, Kristen.
Hi, thank you. I actually prepared remarks and
Oh, great, thank you.
paper. So, as per requested. Hi.
Hi.
My name is Kristen Silvera, and we own, my husband and I, 4050 Main Road in Tiverton, the old Tiverton Four Corners Schoolhouse number 1. And we have, as you probably are aware, been hosting families for over 10 years there at our house. Pre-pandemic, we hosted families from all over the world who wanted to visit Tiverton. During the height of the pandemic, we provided a safe haven for out-of-town family members who wanted to be near their loved ones who lived locally. We have been a place for family reunions, overflows for holiday gatherings, and out-of-town visitors alike. I would like to give a brief overview of the history of short-term rentals as defined by the Rhode Island Legislature. Short-term rental is usually defined as a rental of a residential dwelling unit or accessory building for periods of less than 30 days, owner-occupied or not. On June 30th, 2015, legislation passed requiring operators to pay the state 7% sales tax and 1% local tax, which goes right to the towns where the home is located. They also mentioned, amended Chapter 21-43.1, the Tourism and Development, to include a provision preventing any city or towns from prohibiting the listing of housing units. And I know this was discussed as whether it's prohibiting it or just prohibiting listing it on sites at one of the meetings. In Rhode Island, operators must register with the Division of Taxation, pay a $10 sales tax permit fee, and collect and remit the taxes if they're not advertising. I know this has already been mentioned, that Airbnb, VRBO pay that as well. They provide an alternative to hotel stay, particularly appealing in a town like Tiverton that's beautiful and rural, and also where we only have one hotel. Visitors bring a significant value to the local economy, and studies have shown that the vacation rental guests spend more money in the local community than guests staying at a hotel. And I had a little data to support that. So this is proposing to have special use permits in some of the zones and not permitted in the others. And a characteristic of local zoning power is a well-recognized principle that zoning deals with land use, not the owner, operator, or occupant of the land. Courts have consistently interpreted residential use to mean use of a property for living purposes as a dwelling or a place of abode. The transitory or temporary nature of a rental does not defeat its residential status. So regardless of it's a long-term or short-term or owner occupancy or not, it is still stays as for living purposes. Section 4, owner 1, Section 1, the owner shall occupy the same dwelling unit. This has been discussed quite a bit. No indication that the conversion of long-term residential units to short-term in Tiverton is a problem. I know it is in some larger cities, but here I noted that the study found that only 0.5% of the houses in Tiverton were short-term rentals. Section 8, authorized information disclosure. Any party who accepts a short-term rental with special use permit from the town may be subject to putting in their gross revenue. We think that this could be a challenge under the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, the right of people to be secure in their persons, papers, houses, and effects. I don't know if you want me to not keep going because you have it in
all that you
writing.
have in writing, and that's fine, and I appreciate that you put it all in writing. I think our solicitor actually looked at the zoning issue that you described, and
Yeah, so there's no case law around that. There are some courts in other countries that have taken that position, that short-term rental is residential use, but there's no case law around that supports that yet. We haven't had a decision from our Supreme Court. It hasn't really been come to a challenge yet, so that's potentially, but as I review our zoning code right now, it's a use not permitted, and even though it's a residential zone. And that's one of the things I need to have the council look at too, as to where we're going to, if you're going to permit this, whether as a matter of right or by a special use permit. The only reason why we use a special use permit is does provide neighbors with notice. So people would know. We had some complaints that someone who moves into a residential neighborhood and every other week there's someone new coming in. And I understand, if you live in a residential neighborhood, you don't want new neighbors every week. That's not what you bargain for. So it's just kind of a balance. So this gives people notice of what's going on in their neighborhood. So that's why we went that route. But you can make it permitted as a matter of right, and all they would have to do is fill out an application, and they would get it as a matter of right. But that's a choice that you'll have to make. But I agree with you that some courts have indicated that short-term residentials fit in with residential use. unfortunately, there's not been a court decision in Rhode Island that supports that, so.
Other questions? Thank
Chris-
you.
Kristen,
Oh,
do-
go ahead.
Kristen, do you live in this home?
We do not.
You do not?
No, we don't live in Tiverton, we live about, 6 steps away, but we live in Little Compton. So we're less than a mile from the house, but that was also a part that would be problematic for us, in addition to, to not living in Tiverton, but, we're around and of course very responsive to whatever anybody needs.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to rent that place out if you lived in it too. It's small, right?
Right, yeah, there's only 2 bedrooms, so that would be a little bit difficult. So
I've not been inside, but I've driven by it many times.
Yeah, I had a question about when Holly mentioned that they rent off-season for the winter. Now, in the writing of this, it said the owner must occupy it for 260 days. Would it be, it's not, in Holly's case in particular, since you mentioned it, they rent it for a good majority as a long-term rental. Is that what you're talking about?
Right, so that wouldn't fall under this because it's a long-term rental, so.
Right, but would that count for
yeah.
her 260 days?
Right, so Holly doesn't occupy it at all.
No, right.
Right, so that would not count towards the
It would not,
260 days.
okay.
Wouldn't, right.
As written right now.
Thanks.
Deb, did you have something else?
No, thank you. I'm just noting that of all the people who spoke tonight, no one lives in there, but they're all local.
Nancy does. Nancy does.
Nancy does, I apologize, Nancy, you do. But everyone's local.
Somebody else who was probably going to speak, some others who may
But they're all
may wanna
local.
speak.
But I
Right.
think that's a big difference, is that they're local.
And I think in other places where you have like the mass companies coming and buying and such, in Tiverton, I think it's a person who wants to own a second home. And they will come for 2 or 3 weeks out of the year, but then want to rent it to offset the cost. So that they can use it when they want to, and they can rent it to help pay for it. So I think in this kind of town, I don't think it lends itself as much to mass development, and it lends itself more to, I want to be here too, but I can't be here all the time because I live in wherever.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for the written.
Thanks.
Does anybody else, you look like you're nope, okay, sir?
Hi, my name is Tom Bandoni.
Could you write your name down there for us too, Tom? Thank you.
My wife Christine already spoke about our property, and I just wanted to cover one more detail. I understand that the needs of the neighbors are very important, and that the special use permit yearly renewal is to look out for their behalf. But I think it's a lot of work for the homeowner and a lot of work, especially for the town, to renew them every year. I think a special use permit that stays in place for a number of years still serves the purpose of serving the neighbors the ability to complain and/or put the homeowner on notice, perhaps for a yearly renewal need at that point as a warning. That's the only thing I wanted to add.
Thank you. That's great feedback. Thank you. Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Bandoni? Anyone else wish to be heard?
Thank you.
Sir?
Holly's husband. So sign it.
Please, please. And your name would not be Holly's husband. Frank?
I just wanted to bring up that there had been an appeal at the planning board, and it had to do with the state law. I can cite the, what it is. Do you want to know which one it is?
Sure.
Let's see. Rhode Island General Law 42/63.1-14. And in it, they had come to the conclusion, I think it was the Assistant Town Solicitor, Favish, I guess is the name. But consequently, the opinion was, consequently, Tiverton is utterly without authority in the state of Rhode Island to ignore the intent of Rhode Island General Laws 4263 and limit a residential unit's owner right to offer the owner's property on a hosting platform when to do so is clearly contrary to the plain language of the regulatory scheme. I have those articles later on if you want. I'll copy them for you and give it to you.
You drop off at the clerk's office tomorrow, if that's fine.
Okay, will do.
Or if they're available by email, you can also just email them to the clerk.
You can email, or you could email too.
You either drop them off or email them to the town clerk.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
May I ask?
Any question?
You can ask, oh, you want him to repeat what he said?
I just want to know
The-
from what you were reading.
These were from the minutes of the March 7th, I believe, March 6th, 2019 meeting. There was an appeal for someone who had units, and they were being brought before the board. And the state evidently has made, what do they call it? There's a name for it. Because of having VRBO and Airbnb, they want to collect the taxes.
Yeah, that was a tax. 42, this 42 section is the taxing statute in the general law, so I don't know what, that may have to deal with the taxing power of the town, if the town was trying to tax or whatever. I don't know. I'd like to see it, though, but I appreciate you bringing that to my
Yeah,
attention.
no problem.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you have a question? No. Anyone else? Over here, and then, sir, you. If you can come up and tell us your name and print your name too, please.
My name is Becky Moore, Rebecca Moore. I live on Ford Farm Road. And you were talking about owner-occupied. I'm a little different because I rent just one bedroom with a private bath in my own home, and I'm always there. I do provide breakfast for my guests, and I eat breakfast with them because that's what I enjoy doing. I'm also an Airbnb superhost, and I have been doing Airbnb for 8 years. I started it with my husband and now do it alone, and love it, and have enjoyed having folks from all over the world. And as people have said, we provide a lot of income to people here in Tiverton, as well as Newport and surrounding towns. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions? Okay. And I will, from a personal note, I've done Airbnbs in many locations in the States and in Europe, so certainly not an opponent of Airbnbs, or I should say short-term rentals, because obviously that's only one platform.
Thank you.
Sir? Yeah, you, yep. Oh, it's John, right? I didn't recognize you. I didn't know, I remember you coming up before. I didn't recognize you at first behind the mask.
School committee tonight and you people, so.
Busy night.
Get around. Busy night, I didn't realize the meeting. My name on here, right?
Please. Yeah.
Okay.
And John, just remind me of your last name.
Quirk. Quirk, just like the dictionary.
Yeah.
Quirk in nature.
Quirk.
I'm not a rental guy. I don't rent property. I came in sort of as you were discussing this, so if I get something wrong, please apologize. I apologize up front. I don't understand what you're trying to do, be truthful with you. You know, the Constitution, as the woman said, we're kings of our land. Ever hear that, Joe? The kings of the land. No government can come in and take rights away from us unless we're affecting other people in a way that either injures them or impacts their property when it comes to property. The people already have to meet zoning codes, safety regulations, environmental regulations, right?
So actually, you may have.
Taxes, they have to pay based on regulations.
So just to note, John, you may have missed this. Our zoning code currently does not allow for this use.
Doesn't allow what now?
For the use for short-term rental use.
Well, I don't know how you can do that. You ought to eliminate that part of the ordinance.
It does not allow for it right now.
Then remove that.
Well, we have to add it.
We have to actually add
We
it.
have to add it to allow it.
Then add it to allow it. If that's what you're trying to do, new point, allow it to be done.
That's what we're trying to do.
Then I'm all for that. So it'll be a short speech.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
But I also heard like income and all that.
So there is language in the draft, and that's why we're having this workshop,
Well, take that
to
out.
get feedback. We've heard that feedback a lot tonight.
You're not the IRS.
We'll work on it, John.
You're not the IRS. You're not the Rhode Island state people. We have no right to know what income I get from anything. You don't have that right as a town. The government does because they're collecting taxes and the Constitution gives them that right, in addition to the states. But as a town, you don't have that right. So take that out too, please.
We'll take it under consideration.
Okay,
Like
thank you
all-
very much.
Thank you, John. Anyone else wish to be heard? Sir, I can't see you, but in the back with the sunglasses on your head? Both sirs.
Oh, they both have glasses on their head.
No. If you could tell us who you are and then write your names down there.
Yeah, Ben Deldeo. And
I'm Jonas Deldeo. I guess our situation is a little unique. We have a house that has been in the family for a long time. It's a waterfront property. We're just trying to keep it in the family. We're not trying to run a business by any means. And between the taxes and all the operating costs, it probably costs upwards of $25,000 just to, just for the carrying costs, the operating costs, and the taxes. And one of our concerns is having to inhabitate the house. It's not an ideal location to be living in year round. It's down a long dirt road. I actually lived there one winter, and I had a snowplow, and I still got stuck. Once you plow it, and the snow can drift over the road. So, basically, that was our main concern, right?
I think one of the other things is, like you mentioned, it's in the family for 3 generations. And our goal, this is our first year doing it, but our goal would be to use it during the prime months of July and August. So if that ordinance passed where you would have to have someone in it for 260 days, that would limit us from being able to do that, because we would try to rent it, May, June, September, October, so that we could use it for July and August. Some of our, best childhood memories, was using this place, and, our grandfather bought it, and, he bought it as a cottage, I think for dirt cheap, and then, 50 years later, like you said, taxes are kind of crazy now, so just to be able to hold on to it, this is what we have to do, So it's not something that, we're enjoying, but it's a necessity for us to hold on to it. And we'll have to be able to do that.
So in terms of the major concern is the owner occupancy, were there any other specifics that you had concerns about in the draft?
I think this all the safeties we got covered, right? Was there anything else? I think that was the main concern, was being able to occupy it, especially being on a long dirt road. That's about a half a mile long in the winter times. So.
And while I haven't obviously polled our members, I think it's most likely that we will look at that clearly and determine whether or not it should even stay in, and if it does, then what does it look like?
But as far as our renters go, we are very particular who we put in there. And
Right. We have a few neighbors, we're in close contact with. If there's ever, they text us back and forth on any concerns. They've all been satisfied with the people that we've had in there, and I try to manage who's coming in, pretty thoroughly, ask a lot of questions and so forth.
And they keep mentioning Groundswell, you know, that's the first place they want to go every day, every morning.
Can I ask where you guys live? Do you live in town?
We're all in
or do you-
town, yep. Yeah, we have another brother who's in town, and our mother's in town as well. Yep, so, you know, I
So
think two of us are about
another
5
case
minutes
of
away.
A home that you own, but you live in town too.
Right.
Your mother's the one without the sunglasses, right? Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? 'Cause once I hear from everybody, we're gonna have a conversation. You guys will be here, but I'm gonna limit further input at that point so we can give some good feedback to the solicitor.
So I wasn't actually planning to speak tonight, but I felt like I should. I have a little different situation than
Your name?
most. Alyssa Wood.
Melissa Wood.
Than most of the renters here, because I actually do live in my house most of the time. And then we actually bought a summer cottage and live there in the summer and rent out our main house in the summer. So kind of pays for both, and we did a lot of renovations on our cottage. But even then, even though we stay in our house for the whole school year for my kids, we're still not there 260 days out of the year. And so even that seems, I mean, and we're there most of the time, like I said, so it seems like a very high number for a lot of people to be able to commit to. And our plan is to eventually rent out the cottage that we've been renovating, and it's a summer cottage, so our water gets turned off, so it's not even a viable house for 260 days out of the year. So I didn't know if there'd be some kind of stipulation for something like that, where it could be a percentage based on the months that the house is able to even be
So
occupied.
the house you rent right now, or the house you're thinking of renting in the future?
The summer cottage on Nanaquacket that we have is only, has water from April to October.
And that's not the one that you rent right now?
No, we
Yeah,
live there in
okay.
the summer and then go back to the other house in the winter.
So the difference, Alyssa, is that it's a cottage, a summer cottage.
Yep.
That can only be occupied 6 months of the year.
Only for, I mean, even less than 6 months. It's April 15th to October 15th. So the 260 days would not be possible
Right.
for that house or my other house, as how we're doing it right now.
At some point, it could conceivably be the other way around, where you stay in your regular house all year and rent out the summer cottage too,
Well,
correct?
what we're planning to do actually is just rent out the summer cottage while my kids are in school and then live there July and August so we can spend the summer months there.
Okay. Other questions? Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard?
Mr. President?
Yes. Come on up. Wait, Renee, did you have something first?
After Renee is done, I'd like to get some input from the police chief, if possible.
Okay.
It's actually not a comment, but I found some.
Renee, could you write your name and then introduce yourself?
Renee Jones. I'm sort of like to get some background information on things when I'm starting to look at things like ordinances and so one of the things I found that was very helpful was this article. It's a study done on short-term rentals by the University of Rhode Island for the Rhode Island. You have it? Okay, so, and then there was another one on Airbnbs. And if I can say anything, my biggest concern about this is what you raised, the issue of it becoming more than just one single home and an individual, but people coming in and buying up things, because that's in fact what happens in other locales. And so you have problems with affordable housing, and that's a significant impact on town. So I would be concerned about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Chief Jones? And Chief Reimels, actually,
Yes,
in
thank
case
you.
anybody has any questions for you from the fire safety end.
They got all dressed up, they should come on down.
Questions?
Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Obviously, you've heard from the cream of the crop here tonight. They live there, they work there, they even take out their trash. So we know that we have the cream of the crop here. You will concur, possibly, that we sometimes have had some problems over the past year somewhat?
So I would have to go back and look specifically, but what comes to mind is around the holidays. So, for example, like this past 4th of July, we went to one particular resident of address, don't remember it, at least 3 times, because it was the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, and there were different people on every day lighting off fireworks every day. And the officers were stunned by that, because they went on the 2nd, they said, turn it off, no more fireworks. They went back the next day, and it was a totally different group of people. So, obviously, someone was living there or that it was rented out. So, that was that particular problem in July.
The ordinance talks about having some type of local property manager. Is that something you would recommend, or would you rather go right to the owner? Because there could be, my concern would be a communication issue. You call the property manager doesn't call the owner. Now the owner is gonna lose, quite possibly, his rental for a year because the property manager is not. But then again, my conflict is, we might not be able to contact the owner.
So I'm sure I speak for the chief and he can speak for himself, but as long as we have an active contact, if there's a rental property and these folks are paying a service, property management, they're gonna get in touch with those folks. Whether it's a fire safety issue, a police matter that we need to get in touch with someone, if these folks, the property owners, are paying for property management, I would say that they would have a suit against them if they didn't get in touch with someone, depending on the nature of the call. Even we do this all the time with alarm services. So they used to have alarm services that were in the police department. We all pay, for those of us who have alarms, an alarm service to notify us in the event, and we respond to those all day long, every day. So I would assume with a reputable property management service, that should meet our needs.
Yeah, and to be clear, the ordinance, the draft ordinance does not require a property manager. It requires an individual
Okay.
representing the owner who can take care of things on the spot, so to speak. Or if the owner wishes to use a property management
property
company, they
manager,
can do
okay.
that.
If you could just talk briefly about safety concerns, and I agree with the safety concerns that are listed here. Some may find them burdensome, so if you could address those safety concerns and maybe why we should yearly check on those, I would appreciate it.
Sure, so I certainly agree with the chief. A contact person is definitely necessary. If we go there, for a CO detector activation or smoke detector activation or whatever, and there's rental people there, they're not gonna know what to, if they can't get in touch with somebody, we gotta get in touch with somebody to rectify the problem, or if it's not, we don't wanna consider it safe for them to stay there. If we can't figure out why it's, obviously we can figure out if there's a fire going, something like that, but in the case of like a CO detector or something like that, if it's a boiler issue or what have you, it needs to be taken care of, or you can't safely stay in that building, As far as, it's a touchy subject as far as fire code, because we don't have any jurisdiction in a 1- and 2-family dwelling. So if it's a regular house that they're renting out, is it legally a business that we can get into? Is it not? It's, there's, I don't believe that's been determined at the state level yet. So certainly the safety is obviously my main concern, but as far, I don't know how much we can enforce. I don't know if we could enforce an annual smoke detector inspection or something, something like that. I don't honestly.
I think we could if we use the special use permit, but I think that's what allows us to get in there. Yeah, because it's technically, it's a business because you're renting out a house, but you're not living there.
You're renting the public.
You're having people come in, and out. So that's, I would say that you probably would have jurisdiction to do that. Just as when someone sells a house, right, you have jurisdiction to go in and make sure there's a fire alarm and whatnot. Right?
That's more of a bank issue. The banks require that. That's not a state fire marshal issue. So that's why we do that.
Oh, for a mortgage?
Yep.
For mortgage.
Right, exactly.
I just find the inspections are over the top.
So Donna, just before, do you have questions specific to either of the chiefs? Because we'll get into that, but.
Do you think the ordinance as set forth for going into people's houses every year, it seems cumbersome to me. And you're also saying that it's only a bank requirement as far as allowing them to get approving a mortgage, right?
Yes, the
Yeah.
things required before the sale is complete.
Right. So,
I certainly think it's a good idea. I think, there's regulations that, there's things that regulate when the house was built, who needs this level of protection, et cetera, et cetera. So I certainly agree with that. Would it be cumbersome? I don't know how many there are in town, so, we would certainly do it if asked. Just, if for no other reason, it would give the renters, a sense of safety when they're at the place that they're staying.
Other questions for either of the chiefs?
Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you both. So, I want to just go through the document, and Mike and Nicole, if you can talk to us about what specific input you're going to need. We're going to, talk about some of the feedback that was provided. I don't hear anyone questioning, at least, and again, this is a draft, there'll be other drafts. The terminology of short-term rental. Would everybody agree?
That's a common definition. 28 days or less.
I would like, but I'd like feedback from my colleagues, and also if it's something we can add here, either in that short-term rental language or as a separate definition, probably both, of a campground, and that would not be an allowable use, allowable short-term rental, and maybe we have to look at, so that might be something that might be allowable in an area of town that is not as dense. But
A campground is
That
not a
what would be
short-term
allowable? A campground would be allowable in a less dense? Is that what
no,
you're
I'm
saying?
just, I'm thinking out loud.
I'm not sure.
There's danger in that, so.
I have to talk to you about that, because I'm not sure, but I understand where you're going, but I'm not sure if it's the definition I don't know.
Okay,
We
okay.
can talk about that.
I mean, if we can address that, I think that's an important.
You want to
piece.
exclude campgrounds?
Exclude
So
campgrounds.
if I have a camper,
Campers, tents.
So I guess for me, the way would be
if I live on a
that,
trailer, so
Wait,
if I own a trailer,
What did you just say?
no, I'm trying to.
In our
figure-
zoning as it currently exists, you cannot have a camper on your property and live in it currently. So I'm sure we don't want to open that
But we
Pandora's
must have
box and change
grandfathers.
that.
I don't know.
We have to look at that.
Yeah,
So
okay.
that deserves a lot of attention, but yes.
And whether or not you tie it to that it has to have an operational ISDS. That might be the way of doing it. That's a sewage system, whether it's cesspool or town sewer or, septic. So anybody else have anything on that definition piece? Okay. So Article 4, district use. So right now, Michael, we're saying it's allowable as a special use permit in every residential zone. I'm not unclear on what, not in highway commercial, not in, I forget what I is. now.
Industrial.
Industrial, thank you, and not in open space.
Correct.
Okay. And then the SP, special use, what's the P?
Permitted.
Permitted.
By right.
By right, okay. So you're questioning whether it should be an S or a P?
Correct.
Okay, okay. So
I
let's,
think VC, if I'm correct, is only really Tiverton Four Corners, right? That's the VC zone.
I believe that's our only village commercial.
VC.
VC? Yeah, so just to go across, VC is village commercial, GC is general commercial, HC is highway commercial, W is waterfront, I is industrial, OS is open space.
So, when I think of general commercial, I haven't looked at this, like, if you have a strip mall, general commercial, that could probably be in a general commercial, like, let's say, I'm just making this up, but like a Dunkin' Donuts, a small shop, and you might have an empty shop there.
Right.
I don't know if you wanna have that to be a short-term rental. That could be maybe not permitted in a GC zone, but that's,
So let me ask the counselors this, are we comfortable with, at least for this next draft, if we allow short, and we'll get to what it means for special use permit and timing and everything, allowing it in any of the R residential zones by special use permit?
Yeah.
Anybody have any concerns about that?
Are you talking R30, 40, 60, 80?
Correct, just those right now. You okay?
yes.
Okay, so then, let's go, we'll deal with the village commercial and general commercial in a minute. Also, special use permit in waterfront, are we okay with that? Okay, and then highway commercial, industrial, open space not permitted at all, are we okay with that? Okay, and so, village commercial, do we think we should allow short-term rentals in village commercial? Again, the only village commercial area we have right now is Four Corners. I think there's maybe a couple of places that have apartments over them, that I believe are, well, in fact, the woman who we just appointed to Discover Newport, she lives above her shop, but she lives there. I can't hear you. Cheese Wheel, okay.
There's an apartment in the Cheese Wheel.
Above it? Is that new? Is that in their new addition?
It is.
Oh, okay, okay. And there is the artist in residence in that pottery place, too. I believe, no? Okay. Okay. Anyway, it's limited down there. The point is, there's not very many that we'd have to worry about. Do we want to, for now, not allow it, or do we want it by special permit? Or not at all, or just by right?
Again, this is just a draft, so you
Right.
can change your mind later.
Right.
It's a-
So let's,
Planning board may have a different
yep,
recommendation.
Say no.
not at all, you're saying? Anybody else not at all?
Well,
Yes.
general commercial,
I'm sorry.
where would they have the apartment?
Well, there'd have to be an existing apartment or place that's used for that purpose, for a dwelling.
Well,
And right now, it's limited.
So what if it already exists?
I think we have to look at grandfathered issues, probably as we go through this process. Yeah, I think we first have to figure out whatever we come up with as a draft, who that might affect everywhere.
Oh, I agree, that needs to be considered.
Yep.
To know if these already exist, you'd almost have to do a survey.
Right, and what I would say is if at some point we have a regulation, an ordinance that we want to finalize, and we want to do our best, make our best effort to protect those who have been doing it without any knowledge that, probably shouldn't have been doing it, but it's been done, give them an opportunity to come forward and let us know in a reasonable time frame. And then from my perspective is, if you don't come forward and tell us, that's on the owner, that's not on us.
So, Council President, just under the current zoning code, under residential uses in the village commercial zone, single-family dwelling is permitted by special use, two-family dwelling is not permitted in the VC zone, multifamily structure or apartment house is not permitted, A mixed-use residential is permitted by special use. Household is permitted, community residence is permitted. Taking of boarders or the renting of rooms by a resident family not to exceed 2 roomers or boarders is permitted in the VC zone already.
Okay.
So,
Oh, it's already.
But it's also by special permit.
no, that's permitted.
Oh,
It's
that's
already
permanent
permitted.
use?
It's already permitted.
Okay.
So unless we wanted to change that,
To allow it to make sure it's a
Right.
special permit, right,
so then I would suggest we leave it as in,
If it's already permitted, then you can assume it's already going on, so we should probably leave it permitted.
right. I mean,
Well,
the renting of rooms is
taking of, it's
permitted.
renting of rooms is different, you gotta,
Right.
you're renting, you're living there and you're renting a room.
Right.
Or 2 rooms.
Right.
This could be, you could just rent out the top, not be a, seems like the council's gonna get rid of the owner occupied requirement, so. So just so I'm clear, the taking of boarders means you live there.
I would say so.
Right. So that's permitted now in the VC zone. If you allow it by special use permit, you do not have to live there. You would be able to do it like any other
Okay.
zone.
Okay.
So-
But if they meet all that other criteria of short-term, and we're not gonna do owner occupancy, it should all be the same, right?
Right.
Well, yeah,
That's what-
that's a policy decision. That's
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah,
So then I would suggest it be special use permit the same way that others would be.
Right, right.
Are we okay with that for now?
yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And general commercial? Do we think it should be allowed in general commercial?
So general commercial right now, as far as residential use is permitted, mixed-use residential is permitted, a household is permitted, community residence is permitted, and family daycare is permitted. Taking of boarders is by special use, bed and breakfast is by special use in the general commercial, motel or hotel is permitted. Home occupation, that's different, so I just read the residential uses.
Right. So do we want to make it match those other uses such as bed and breakfast, which has to have a special permit?
I think we should make it all match.
Okay. All right, so we're
it's S
suggesting
as well.
that be an S as well. So then moving on to the zoning board review article 15, special, section 4. Special use permit, all proposed short-term rentals shall apply for and receive a special use permit prior to offering the dwelling unit as a short-term rental. If a special use permit for a short-term rental is granted, a dwelling unit may be used as a short-term rental as defined in Article 2 of this zoning, subject to the following standards. So, we'll get to we already said special use permit, so basically
These are now the
this,
standards to
right,
get
these
the
are the
special use
standards to
permit.
get to that. So, owner occupancy, we've heard a lot of feedback on the concerns about owner occupancy. I'm just gonna put it right out there. Does anyone want to consider, I'm gonna assume, and it could be a false assumption, that we wanna remove that, but does
Yes.
anybody want to consider reducing the owner occupancy as opposed to removing it? And again, this is draft, we can come back to it at a later date.
I think we should remove it.
Yeah, I think we should, I agree, yeah.
Okay, so let's remove that. Are we comfortable, what I'd like to see some research, if possible, into the other thought of, is there a way to limit the number of units that any one person can have as short-term
That will
rentals?
take some research.
Yeah,
I know,
so-
you know, that raises a lot of constitutional issues.
Right, right, I understand that. Anybody have anything else on that owner occupancy section? Registration and application, this sets forth that it's done every year, and it would have to, so every year, Michael, let me make sure we're understanding this. Let's say I decide to do an Airbnb or a short-term rental, and I've done my application for this year, everything's all set, I have it, I've gone through the zoning board for my special use permit. I only have to do that once, or every year, the special use permit? Okay, okay,
That gives, the rationale behind that is that gives the town a little bit of leverage if there's problems in the neighborhood. You're not guaranteed a special use permit. You can demonstrate, obviously, I think everyone here today has demonstrated that you're probably a very good Airbnb be individuals, but you might have a rogue person who decides that it's gonna become a party house or a frat house or whatever, and the neighbors start complaining, then, you know, next year they come to apply, no, you're not gonna be able to get it because of it. So, but again, the time limit is
Right, so
discretionary, so, but it would be an every year application.
is there a way for us to look at the combination of elements here to address those, somebody used the term, so I'll use it, bad apple concerns, through fines and/or for habitual offenders just pulling their special use permit for a longer period of time, but extending the length that the general special use permit is out there for, from, right now it's 1 year, maybe to 2 to 3, because I think it was Mr. deMedeiros who suggested, and I know we haven't run this by the zoning board yet, but we had probably a dozen people here, I'm guessing at least, tonight, with at least one short-term rental. That in and of itself could be a big task for the zoning board, and I know that we don't have everybody here.
Just have a suggestion.
Yep.
I'm gonna try to find a middle road here with this one. If initially people have to apply for this, the $100, if there's no complaints, they shouldn't have to spend $100 again. If there's a complaint, then they have to answer and maybe pay the $100 to be allowed to continue, because if you look, it has some degrees of how many times there can be a complaint. So that would give a chance to address the complaint and whether they're going to get the permit or not. But if there's no problems, I don't think they should have to keep applying for the pay a $100 permit.
Well, my concern is this. $100 is not gonna cover the cost of filing an application, getting inspectors, zoning officials out there
Right.
to do all of this.
Right.
So that's my concern. $100 is not enough, at least for the first year, in my opinion. I think the $100, in my opinion, has to be a little bit more. If you want to extend that for 2 years as opposed to 1 year, that's one thing. But I don't think that the $100 is going to cover the cost of government, at least for the first year, for everything that's going to be required.
Well,
Okay. That's okay,
I'm
thank
sorry,
you. That's okay, thank you though, thank you.
I hear you, Bill, but they're already paying taxes, and they're already paying for the building inspector. We're talking about applying for a permit. It shouldn't be a heavy amount of a fee. It just shouldn't. And if there's no problems with the facility or the place that's doing this, no complaints at all, I don't think we should be having the zoning and building official using their time going back there or having people come for a permit every year. I think it's redundant.
So I'm hearing a couple different things here, and I do think as part of this, however the final product looks, we have to have an implementation plan, because building and zoning, they're not gonna be able to go out and visit all these folks within a short period of time, on day one. So we have to figure out, what that implementation plan might be, and I'm not even sure how to do that at this point, but we have to, I think, figure that out. Secondly, I hear Councilor Vieira suggesting a fee higher than $100. What would you suggest? Whether or not it's annual is a separate issue, but what would you suggest, Bill?
I don't know. If we're gonna do this for 1 year, then maybe 150, a little bit more than the $100. I don't know if that covers the cost of government, at least for 1 year. This is not, really, this is a business though, Donna. This is a business. they're doing this to make money.
It's
Some
also
of them,
private property.
some of them are engaging with the people and probably have the same people back and have vested interests with these people. But the bottom line is, these are homes, and they're making money. So while I disagree with most of this, I don't think it's burdensome to have them pay for the cost of government, whatever that cost is. I don't know what it is.
Well,
Other towns and cities feel like $100 will cover this every year. I think because we're new to this, it's gonna be a little bit more. It's gonna be taxing on our zoning official, on our clerk's office, on our fire department, for everyone to get out there and to do their job, should we vote for the rest of this stuff. So I think it has to be a little bit more.
Go ahead, Donna.
Okay, I hear you once again, but the cost is random. There's been no study as to what the price should be. We picked $100 because it seems to be, most towns seem to be doing $100. I just think you don't want to make it burdensome to people. It says per unit. You're just trying to herd cats right now. I mean, I don't think there's any need to make it burdensome with fees. I don't agree with it. It is all private property. All of a sudden, we're gonna go in the private property, we're gonna, have the fire. I think it's a little over the top. I think $100 is, how much really is it gonna cost? We haven't figured that out for the zoning inspector to go out there. Remember, they're already paying taxes. They're already paying for the resident fees and taxes.
So what is the zoning official is looking to see if they meet the criteria for the special permit?
Which is in the code book, right? Is that it? Basically.
I mean, it talks here about fire extinguishers determined by the zoning official. Is that the zoning official or the fire marshal?
It shouldn't come under the zoning, I don't think.
Right,
do you?
and I know. And I agree. If all of the neighboring towns are doing $100, I would hate to do more than that. And if it so taxes our zoning official, maybe we look like we talked about with planning, that we do a per diem person and their cost gets absorbed by these fees. And I think that they should be more than a year. I think that we have more in town than we even know, and we haven't heard about them. I think we've heard about the minority of them that have had problems, and the vast people here have had no issues. We didn't even know that they existed because there's been no issues.
I think we want people to come forward. If you make it burdensome and difficult, they're gonna go underground.
Right.
You're not gonna get any cooperation at all.
So I heard a suggestion of 150. We have 100. Does anybody want to also look at 150? Jay, what is your thoughts? What are your thoughts?
Well, I want to stick with the annual renewal for a number of reasons. And to me, $100, for the vast majority of these places, from what we've heard here tonight, and we've only heard from the good bees, I'm sure none of the bad people were going to show up and tell us how they were in violation, had a lot of problems, but I'm sure they exist. In any case, the annual renewal and $100 fee would probably more than be adequate for the vast 90% of them.
So and I have no scientific proof of this, but I'm guessing that we have between 50 and 100 units in town. So that's at $100, that's between $5,000 and $10,000, just to note that. I personally never anticipated that the fee was intended to cover all of our costs. There are plenty of other things we do, I would say that we have fees for that may or may not cover all of our costs. Would that be accurate? So I am reluctant to go higher. I also would like to think about Donna's suggestion about, do we tie a renewal, first off, do we set a higher threshold for renewal of everybody, meaning 2, 3, 4, 5 years, as opposed to 1 year, one of those others, or not? Do we just do one registration and special use permit, and that carries, unless we figure out a way to incorporate, Donna, your suggestions about violations? And then those who have violated may have to have their special use permit renewed, and at that point, maybe the registration fee for a renewal for them is higher, because it's gonna take us more effort to conduct that piece. I'm just not sure how to cleanly articulate that.
So, this is my 2 cents. I think it's gonna take the town probably 2 cycles, maybe 3, to figure out how many of these actually exist. I was actually shocked to see how many that were. I didn't think we had this many, but I don't know. So I think an annual registration, at least for the first couple of years, is a good idea, because it will help us get, the word is gonna spread and whatnot, because, again, right now, technically, everyone we heard from tonight is operating, quote-unquote, a business in a residential zone, which is not permitted. So I know the town has no interest in shutting these people down, and I think they probably provide a great service and bring tourists into the town. So I think that setting the annual registration initially for the first couple of years, and then the council can certainly revisit it and maybe up it, after we get a good number of experience behind us at this point. I'm reluctant to have someone, you may have a neighbor who just doesn't like new neighbors every week. So if that person has a bad
Right.
neighbor and they just complain every year,
Right.
that person's gonna be forced to come back.
And for me, that's the difference between me complaining and us documenting that it's a true violation.
True, but it's all matter of degree, right? So one parking violation, it's a violation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's just my 2 cents. It's a policy decision, but I think you have to grow into this, and I think we have to get a better number, and I think as you I agree with Donna, you don't wanna make the fee so high that they're gonna do it anyway, right? They're doing it now. So, keep the fee low enough. The town has sent out a message that we wanna be cooperative. We do have a right to regulate this. I think we have a responsibility to regulate it for a lot of different reasons, for safety and for other issues. And also, again, most of the people that we heard from tonight, all the people we heard from tonight, seem to be good business people, and they know what they're doing. But, we don't want to have a rogue person out there that, if your neighbor is renting out and having parties every weekend in a nice residential neighborhood, you're not going to be happy about that.
Yeah, and I will also.
And we've had some experience with that.
And I will also want to note that complaining on Facebook does not equal a complaint to the town government.
That is true. That is
Not
true.
at all.
It's not official.
That's official. But that's just my 2 cents.
So, let me turn this around a little bit. Your thoughts on doing what you described for the first several years, 3 years, let's say. At the same time, kind of like we're doing with the trash bags at the beach. So if I do my new registration and I've had I have a clean bill of health, so to speak, do I get a rebate on that in some way? It's not a right way of saying it, but, so that we make sure that we get the information that we're looking for, and then say, okay, great job, thank you. Everybody here, I think, great job, thank you. We're giving you your check back. And you don't have to go back to the zoning board for the special use permit, it's granted. Or is that a technical piece under zoning laws that we would still have to do that?
So what are you proposing, Mike? I'm not understanding.
So
about a
I'm
rebate?
trying to look at different options. One option is we just do annual registrations all the time, $100 or whatever, no questions asked, and you have to go before the zoning board again. Another option is what you were suggesting. I think what you were suggesting is that once you register, you're good to go, maybe ad infinitum forever, or maybe for a 2 to 3, 4, 5 year period. But during that period, you don't have to do anything else as long as you're in good standing. And if you aren't in good standing, to be measured by some other method that we haven't necessarily gotten to, then you do have to, and maybe then we impose on those individuals annual registrations for a certain period of time until we can see good conduct, so to speak. Or the other thought I had, given what Mike is saying, for the first few years at least, so that we can cycle through everybody and get everybody in, that we do an annual registration. But if, again, I'll pick on Nancy, she's, I'm staring right at her. If Nancy comes forward, she's had no violations, then we say, well, Nancy, just take your check back. We look at it.
Or waive the check for the second.
Waive the check for the second, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
we could end up with some, you could end up taking money that you got one physical year and giving it to somebody else in the next.
It would have to
That
be
could
in a
cause
restricted
problems.
fund.
It would be better if we said, do it for a few years, we get the database populated, if you will. We know who everybody
No,
is.
then we gotta watch it.
And then from that point forward, the people that are doing well, we don't charge a fee. And those that are causing us a lot of grief, we do.
Yeah, and Mike's terminology is actually better than what I was describing. It would be that Nancy would come forward. Nancy has a good record, so we're waiving her fee for that year. So it's not an exchange of new money. It's just saying, okay, good job, keep the good work up, go forward. But then when I come to it and they say, well, Chief Jones says, oh, don't give him any approval. He's had this, that, and the other thing. Okay, well, then I either can't do it or I have to go through the zoning board again and get looked at as to whether or not I should get a new special use permit.
One question, Mike. When they go before the zoning board for the first time, are they going to be required to keep going through the zoning board? That
Well-
seems kind of,
Well, so my understanding, and by the way, I don't have any Airbnbs.
or
so,
can they just go to the
um,
town clerk and just have it?
Well, that's what we're trying to figure out, because right now, as it's written, they have to go back to the zoning board every time. So I think I think the intent, and I don't know, Jay, if even with your suggestion, is that we limit the need to return at least to the zoning board, regardless of whether or not we're doing it one every year or, some permutation of longer time periods. Because I think that's a burden on those who are doing what they need to be doing, and it's also a burden on, as Mr. DeMauro pointed out, a burden on the zoning board, the zoning official, and others.
The only thing I would add is, so we don't have the authority to license these, because in order to have a licensing authority, we'd have to have special legislation from the General Assembly. So every license that the town issues, you can go back to the general laws and find a license provision that allows it. So that's, what you're kind of considering is a license, pretty much, because you're saying once they get the special use permit and they meet all the requirements, then they just go to the town clerk and she can just sign off. Well, that would be a license. So the only really, until the legislature, and there was, attempts to license this, but it didn't go anywhere, until the legislature gives cities and towns the right to license them, our only alternative is to allow them to go to the zoning board, because that's the only forum where we could actually pull back or not grant the special use permit. Even though the word is permit, it's really not a license. It's a land use regulation that we are allowed. So right now, the zoning board is the only game in town, and I think we saw that across every town in the state of Rhode Island uses the zoning board. And the reason why that is because the legislature has not given us the authority to license Airbnbs. They may do so in the future, and this would all become moot. But until we do so, this is the only regulatory action that we have.
But it doesn't restrict us from defining a longer
You could say
special
2
use
years,
permit
exactly,
period.
right.
Okay.
But it also,
The other thing here too is a special use permit would also help us define the property. In other words, the owner is going to have to tell us, I have X number of bedrooms, I have X amount of parking, I have this
Right.
kind of septic system in the backyard, I have, all these things. I'm using a detached garage as a bedroom. And once you know all those things, then there's no reason to reestablish them because they're there. The only thing that would change is if there was a permit pulled to do a change to the property, and then we'd need to know that. So going before the zoning board every year would be really not necessary or required.
Deb?
no, I just think I think it just sounds like a lot. It talks here about the zoning official shall coordinate with the Tiverton Police and Fire to do all these inspections. It just sounds like a whole lot. It just sounds like a whole lot.
They have a hard time doing what they're doing now, going to building sites.
So,
Let us think about that.
yeah,
We'll
so
get
if you can
we'll-
come back to us with maybe looking at some other places, if they have extended,
How they're regulated.
right,
Yeah.
over time.
Yep.
And
And they award, if they award good behavior.
yeah, and I think also, kind of what you were saying about, the cycling it through, if we pick a longer time period, I'm just gonna pick 5 years, okay? Maybe that's too long, whatever. But then as we get groups of people coming through, they get assigned, it's kind of like when you change from a 2-year term for an office to a 4-year term, you figure out, okay, well, people who are in here now, one of them gets extended and the like. So we figure out how to roll that through so that we don't have a mass of everybody in the same year that would come due.
Okay, I have a suggestion. Why don't we use a system of their last name, like from A to F, they
Yeah,
go
we
from
could do that.
January, and then another group goes, so 4
Yeah.
times a year, you have 4 different groups
Yeah.
going through. Also,
Yeah.
yeah, and the zoning official, have we even talked to him about how much of a burden this is gonna be?
So again, since this is preliminary,
Yeah.
I think we wanted to see first, if we gave this to the zoning board and the official now, they're gonna give us feedback on what this says right now, as opposed to, we have this conversation, Mike and Nicole go back, massage it, come back to us. We say, okay, good, and actually, at least when they get that draft, I think it's probably behooves us to then, Chris, to have that conversation with those folks to really look at that. So I don't know, have you had?
So I've had a couple of conversations. This fee is, I did some research. I could find 25 properties on Airbnb. At $100 a piece, that's $2,500 a year. We're not gonna be able to do all those inspections for that kind of money. It is what it is. And administratively setting it up and maintaining all these records every year. And I'm not trying to diffuse the fact that, it's more governmental getting involved. Maybe you do a fee and you make it like a 3-year fee, but maybe you pick up your other piece in tangible property tax that we're not picking up now, because it is a business. So all the assets that are not residential assets now, that are being used as a business, we pick up under the assessor's office. So there are a number of things we need to look at to do what's appropriate on behalf of the community, to treat it, if we're gonna treat it like businesses, like we would treat every other business. So I don't know what that income stream would be yet, but that would be a discussion between the assessor as we go through that process. And I think it would mitigate, I don't know if we would have to do an inspection every year. You might want to do inspection 1 year, but then waive it for 3 years. That's something I'd have to talk to the fire department about, as to how long, these CO2 and smoke detectors last before they have to go out and have another inspection done. So there are a number of things that we need to work our way through.
So then, you'll come back to us with something related to 2, which is the registration and application requirement and the fee. And also, assuming the inspection process.
Correct.
Mike, yes? Yeah, okay. Local representative designation, I think, we all kind of heard that most everybody who spoke tonight is local. And I think that most of you kind of felt like, well, it's important to have somebody here if I'm not here. And, it could be that, I call up my best friend and say, hey, I'm gonna be out of town for 6 weeks. Can you, be the conduit for everybody that, my renters and the like that may need that assistance? It doesn't necessarily, I don't think, have to be formal, but it does mean that if I pick my next door neighbor this time and then, next time it's gonna be, my brother-in-law or something, but he's in New York, so that wouldn't work. But anyway, then, we'd have to look at that because it would be hard to keep track of. So we want to try to have some stability with that piece.
We'll take the residing in Tiverton out?
Yeah, I think
would go like
residing
a
in.
25-mile
They could
radius
be-
or something like
yeah.
that.
50 miles or something?
Well, at the same time, whoever this person is has to be able to respond in a timely manner and has to have the authority to deal with the situation on behalf of the owner. So a property manager in Florida is not gonna do us a hell of a lot of good.
Great.
Well, let me play devil's advocate.
Go ahead.
I have that property manager in Florida who picks up the phone every time one of my people call him or the chief needs to reach him and gives the chief every piece of information he needs. Maybe I leave keys with the fire chief and I don't know if we want to get into that, but I'm just saying, or with the town, to be able to access and give permission. Again, I don't know if we want to get into that, but if it's a plumbing emergency, like I said, you don't want me fixing your plumbing. So I'm gonna call up, I'm gonna have a plumber to call. If it's an electrical issue, I'm gonna have an electrician to call, because you certainly don't want me to fix your electrical problem. So that kind of stuff. So, what difference does it make if I'm in Boston, if we use the 50 mile, or if I'm in Florida?
I don't see the responsible person as somebody dealing with plumbing or electrical issues. I see that person as having to deal with management issues, with neighbors, with that kind of
Okay.
stuff.
So
That
intervening,
almost
yeah.
certainly needs to be a local
Okay.
person. Local being within maybe a half an hour away, they could live in Warren, or, they don't have to live in Tiverton or live in the house necessarily. But when Chief Jones calls them up and says, I'm at this property and they have a hell of a bonfire in the backyard, there's 40 people in here and they don't want to leave, what do we do?
Well, if they won't leave for the chief, they're not gonna leave.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you know what
Well,
I'm
they're gonna
saying. You need somebody with the authority
Okay.
to deal with that situation.
Point
That's
taken.
close.
Did you have something? Okay. So, we're gonna remove the residing in Tiverton, I hear. Do we wanna put a distance related or a time related? We already have shall a response take more than, and shall respond immediately to Tiverton officials in cases of complaints regarding the special use permit, but in no case shall it take more than 12 hours.
What does response mean? Does that mean just they answer a phone call back?
Well, and I think the,
In-person response. I think
It
it's
says
designed
here, it does say in
to
person.
deal with what Jay indicated.
okay,
In person.
We'll give you some suggestions on that.
okay,
We'll take out that, we'll give you either a mile or a time limit. Probably
Okay.
a radius. Radius is probably more
easy to
easier
map,
to
yeah,
match.
yeah. Because
It's also objective.
it could be 30 miles today and tomorrow there's an
Correct.
accident that keeps
Could be
me,
a firm from Florida has a representative within that distance or timeframe.
or a helicopter,
But we have those too.
a jet copter.
We got a lot of that.
Nuisances? Are we okay with that?
Problem This one.
Events and parties, are we okay with that?
No, hang on.
Oh, sorry.
Nuisance.
Oh, I thought you said you had no problem, I'm sorry.
No, my only problem is the way it's worded. Shall not be used in a manner that is inconsistent with the abutting property's uses, nor in such a manner that it creates a nuisance. And with any regards of any patterns of improper use. I've said this before. You're on vacation, you're renting a house, you're there to be on vacation, and you may want to, have a fire pit in the backyard at 10:30 at night, and you're probably going to be a little bit noisy than your neighbors are used to, and they may work at night, and you're up at 7 o'clock in the morning playing baseball in the backyard. Are these nuisances? And are they improper? No. They're generally done in a backyard in a neighborhood.
I think that with anything, if a neighbor complains to the police, I don't know what disturbing the peace is, the definition,
It's
but we're not,
subjective.
but we're not going to call a property manager over every disturbing of the peace. I would imagine the police will come down and deal with the situation accordingly, and a report will go to the administrator, and the administrator will contact the owner of the property manager. I just don't think we need to micromanage every event or every smoke pit. The police will respond to a complaint, and that will be notified to the administrator, and then that maybe will be one strike, depending on the situation, but I don't know that we need to micromanage every event or every nuisance.
Oh, I'm not suggesting we do. I'm just saying that
What's a nuisance to you might not be a nuisance to
I
me.
think he's saying the language is too broad.
yeah,
It's really,
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, it is. It's just-
when you're saying,
I-
and improper and all this.
Well, I just don't agree with the nuisance. Wasn't that a problem with the animal ordinance, that nuisance, like nuisance to one person, nuisance to another? And just regular noise is annoying to somebody else, but it's just regular noise. People are people. I mean, if they want to sit outside and they want to talk, all of a sudden, because they're renters, there's a problem. I mean, I don't agree with it, and I agree with Bill that we're getting into micromanaging behavior that we have no business micromanaging. If it's such a problem, then okay, let somebody in the neighborhood call the police or something if it's that much of a problem. I just don't agree with it. We have plenty of ordinances that cover 5, 4, and 5, actually. We have ordinances in place. I don't think we need to have more. We could just say, see ordinance, blah, 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 I mean,
Like the sound.
yeah.
So, let me ask, Bill, were you suggesting to do away with 4?
I was suggesting to do away with
Okay,
4
I
and
wasn't
5,
clear-
yes.
I wasn't clear on that. Okay.
It's too obtuse. It's just,
5 is already really covered.
I was already covered in ours, we're just.
Yeah, you gotta get you've gotta get a,
I think the reason why we put it here is because we want to give the owners and people who operate this, you have to know the code to go back to look at events and parties, right? I mean, you have a very unique events and parties ordinance in the town that's unheard of, frankly, in many other towns. That, you can have a party, I forget, it was inside, outside, if it's outside, you need a permit, if it's inside, you don't, unless you pay for a sound variance, I mean, and you're limited to 2 a year, so a homeowner in Tiverton right now can only have 2 outside parties a year with music, but they gotta get a sound variance.
If it'll be over a certain distance.
That's the
If
problem.
over a certain distance.
After like 10 o'clock at night or something
So
like
that's,
that.
without music, they're okay.
Right, that's right. So I think I think the event and parties was just kind of put in there to, so that when someone looks up a short-term rental, they can say, okay, well, here's a restriction that the town has without having to be a scholar in the town of Tiverton ordinances and look back to the parties and events. But you can take it out, it's from.
So,
Or just reference.
Or just
yeah,
reference
what if we do something, Donna, I think you suggested something like this. Just modify 4 and 5 to say, and if you can come back to us, something to the effect of, it must comply with all ordinances of the town and really, yeah, something like that. So that way we're not creating a new ordinance, we're just saying,
Yeah.
these folks are on the hook to make sure they understand what that means.
Yeah, and basically, I think if the people that are renting, if they put that they have to comply with all ordinances as they're signing the little lease or whatever they sign, that lets everybody know that they're gonna comply with the ordinances in town.
And I agree with that. The only thing that you wouldn't know, and I didn't know, that you have this ordinance that says if you're gonna have a party outside of your house,
Yeah.
and it's above a certain decibel level, you gotta get a permit, and you can only have 2 a year. That's, like I said, that's kind of unique to Tiverton.
Right. Well, when people are applying for, it's just a suggestion, when they're applying for their $100 permit, maybe we could hand them, the people that own these properties, what the ordinances are, so they know.
Well, that's what 6B does.
Is it stated, hand it to them?
A document or pamphlet addressing the concerns for neighbors, avoiding nuisance behaviors and activities, et cetera. You could include the most likely and
But it
pertinent
says
sections
guests.
of the ordinances.
It says guests, though, I'm talking about the owners of the
Yeah,
property.
So Donna's suggesting that the zoning official, let's say, I come in and do the registration, and I go to the zoning board, they say, okay, and we're giving you, as the person, the owner, this list of ordinances.
Yeah.
Which you're also going to give your guests.
Right, right.
So that covers that.
So you'll come back to us with some suggested language on those
Mike,
sections.
I have a question for you. Two outside events per year. Is that attached to the owner or the property? So the corollary to that
I think
is
it's
the
the property.
property or the guest.
I think it's the property. That's a good question, but I mean, I think it's intended for.
Because we heard some people here tonight say, they don't want anything to do with weddings and parties. One said it's too big a pain, so. I love it.
Okay, so Mike's looking that up. Moving on to 6, the information to be supplied to guests. So would it be the zoning official saying how many fire extinguishers, and I'm not sure why this goes to guests.
Seems misplaced.
Right. Michael or Nicole, should that go in a different piece?
I'm not aware that a fire extinguisher is required as equipment in
Any place.
private dwelling.
No,
Right.
it's not.
So if we want it, then we should define what that looks like, we should have the fire marshal's help.
Yeah, I think we need to talk to the fire marshal, but I think, these are not private dwellings, right? So let's be clear.
These are not private
These are
dwellings.
not private dwellings, these are
There we
rental,
go.
these are short-term rentals. So it's not a private dwelling. It's a private dwelling that are used for short-term rentals.
So do exits need to be defined as exits?
What is it, gonna have a big exit sign now? People say.
They don't have to be big though.
So I think we need to confer with the
We have
fire
to talk to the
marshal.
fire marshal.
Okay. We talked about the ordinance issues, copy of all conditions placed on the special use permit, instructions for proper disposal of waste. And anybody have any concerns with any of those other sections there? No. Okay. Advertisement, owner of the rental, in all listings, state that they have been approved by us. Recitation of any special conditions on the special use permit and the notice on parties. So, I'm not sure how they would put the notice on parties in there if we're not, yeah. Is everybody okay with taking C out of that? Unless, well, Notice that any events, parties, or other amusements followed by the owner, allowed by the owner must,
Let me ask a question. Those of you who do this on, let's just say Airbnb, is there a lot of room on there to define what you can and cannot do at your property? I mean, can you say in your listing, I'm approved by the town of Tiverton, I'm licensed, and by the way, as you said, no parties, no weddings. Can you put that in your listing? Or can you put in there, the town requires that if you want to have a party or a wedding, you have to get a permit? Which means they'd have to do it for you because you'd have to get a quorum.
I think it's too much wordage for Airbnb or VRBO. You might say that you, something small.
I think if you're approved.
Yeah, you're usually approved by Airbnb or Verbo. They send to you whether you like it or not, but you don't have the ability to
It's just an
send all the information
advertisement.
or give the information to the person that's renting. You can't have a party, you can't do this, you can't do this, so you gotta take care of your garbage, you can't put that on either Verbo or
I get
Airbnb.
it.
But you do have those in, special instructions when the guests arrive. We have a whole book that mentions the trash, everything that needs to be
Oh,
done.
okay, there you go.
Wi-Fi and, so
But
that-
you also communicate with them by email if they ask you a question.
You can't really do that either. Airbnb and Verbo doesn't really allow you to,
Unless someone books.
unless you.
right,
Once
unless they book, right.
then their information.
So they have to actually book.
Yeah.
Although I thought, so, we were going to rent a place in Virginia Beach to go visit our daughter 2 years ago now, probably. And I never booked with this person, but there was a way for me to message him, and then we had a communication back and forth around it. Eventually it fell through because they were remodeling, but, it did allow for that, I thought.
You can message through the
Right.
platform.
Yeah,
But, I just don't see you, it's limited.
right,
I think.
right.
But you can, in your profile, say, I somehow say that there's no parties. I forget exactly, but it's in my profile. I know I have that.
I guess for our purposes, my question to my colleagues is, do we want all of this, knowing that the burden's on these folks? So if they don't tell their people who are renting that you can't have a party unless they, the owner, have granted them permission, which means that the owner probably has to come to us first to get permission, do we need them to put all that verbiage on there, or just, they're doing it, if they let it without permission, they're doing it at their own risk to not be able to rent later?
Yeah.
Well, I just want to make sure we don't allow ourselves to fall into the very worst-case situation where somebody rents a house and they invite all their friends over and they have a big to-do. The next-door neighbor calls the police calls the local representative, and we shut it down. It's not gonna be good for the town, and it's not gonna be good for the owner.
Well,
And
that's
it
their
could have
problem.
It could have been resolved if somewhere in the listing, we said, or they said, that if you want to do any of these kind of things, you must first get a permit.
So,
Most towns do this anyway, so they probably know it from home, but they may not.
But it's still.
so
it's still
let me ask you this. Let's say that everybody has this clause on their, they can do it, it says it on their listings, and I get there, and so they rent to me, and I get there and I read the book, and the book says it too. I don't care. I'm just gonna do it anyway, so you're gonna have the same situation.
There's always that 10%.
Yeah, so I don't know, what's everybody else's thoughts on that?
I think you're right, Mike. It's the burdens on the owner.
Are you okay if we strike that for now?
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, okay.
So 7A, just leave,
Just leave 7A in there. Yeah,
I just
and
wondered
it
if
gives
there
us
was
time
a
to think
way
about it. You know, maybe some bright mind will come to us and say, oh, that was not a smart thing for you guys to eliminate, here's why, and we say, oh, okay. Authorized information disclosure, I heard very clearly, so Chris, I want to hear more from you on this one. I heard very clearly on 8 that folks don't feel we should get the revenue information.
Yeah, I don't
That's
think we
almost
need
a
the
stop.
Okay, and that's the only piece that's in there, right?
I don't agree with it.
Special use permit.
We have no need to know.
There's no
So
need for us.
we're okay with striking that?
It's like being nosy.
Okay, striking 8. Inspections, again, this is part of what you're gonna come back to us with?
Yes.
Okay, same with the
It'll be
enforcement,
The zoning official and/or appropriate
Yeah.
officials will provide the final inspection.
so in 10 as well? Or do we wanna look at the
Yes.
fines? Do we think any of the fines are too high? Assuming they go forward as is,
500 is the maximum under our.
500 per
I
day.
do like that the fines can be abated by the zoning official for a first instance of noncompliance. So, I mean, there's, you know, there is some leeway.
Okay, so everybody's okay with the dollar amounts, then Mike and Nicole will come back to us on that whole piece that we talked about.
Is
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm just thinking of the dog ordinance and some of those ordinances, and they incrementally go up like 25, 50, 75, depending on how many, it goes up as there's problems. I was just wondering if it could be more incremental rather than starting at $100 a day. It doesn't even give anyone a chance to fix it. I mean, I just,
Says up to.
does it say
So
like
who
how
determines the up
quickly
to?
noncompliance?
Do we have other,
Shouldn't there be like a?
Let me work it out with them, but I think the issue is that normally we work with entities, and as long as they're receptive and they work with us, 99.9% of the time, we don't even deal with fines.
yeah, okay.
It's the obstinate, I'm gonna do it whether you like it or not, that will, so you have to have a limit somewhere for us to start with. And in most cases, by the time we ever get to court, those are gonna get mitigated anyhow.
Yeah, it's a citation for a fine, but only the municipal court can actually impose the fine, so.
And most of the times they get negotiated up, so.
So who's really, it's saying the zoning official, but the person probably, is it that he's going into the place again to check it? Or is it that?
So a place that's not even licensed, which would be a benefit and protection for the rest of the entities who are licensed.
Not listed.
Right, so if I go on and find that, Donna, you're renting, you have a listing on Airbnb, and I say, Chris, did Donna register?
Don't have to worry about Donna, she'll come.
I'm not renting any of my rooms out.
We're teasing you, I hope.
I know.
So you'll come back to us after
will.
having
All right.
further
Come back with a plan.
conversation.
Yeah, I think the fine for advertisement
Yeah.
errors is probably ridiculous, probably get rid of that.
Yeah.
It's kind of an amalgamation of everything, rather than town.
I don't know, can we start with a warning first? We do it with
That's what
dogs.
we would start with.
I think we usually do.
We would.
But it doesn't say it here,
It
does
says
it?
up to, so in most
Oh.
cases, we would start with a warning. We very rarely, we always try to work with the
No,
constituents.
I think it
Try
should
to-
say warning.
Well, it
so-
does say said fines may be abated by the official for the first
Right.
instance. So that's kind of a warning.
We'll come back with some
I'll
language.
But
have to come
I see
back
what you're
to it.
saying, yeah.
All right.
So on that whole section 10, all of it, do you need anything else? Okay, and just again, so folks know, it does say the effective date of January 1st. That will depend on however long this process takes. Bill?
We're still on section 10?
Did
Yes.
you have something else on section 10?
Section 10C, in lieu of revocation, the zoning official shall impose a minimum fine of 7 days of maximum potential revenue for the listing per day of noncompliance.
Okay.
Not quite sure that this whole thing was kind of a money grab type of situation on our behalf. So I would strike that we're not here to impose, whatever their potential revenue is, we get 7 days of it, if I'm reading that properly.
So here's
In
what
lieu
I
of
think,
revocation.
in lieu of revocation. So I
Right.
can choose, take it away, I don't want to do it anymore, and I'm going to lose a whole season's worth of income. Or, okay, I usually rent out for $100 a night.
But we don't know what their potential revenue is anyways, because we're not.
You do by going on Airbnb, you do.
I can
Or
tell you,
Verbo.
it varies greatly.
Right. I
Depends
mean-
depends on the property. So it goes from,
And this is
like,
all subject to review by a court. Like,
Right.
it's not- The zoning board doesn't
Right.
just, this is, you're cited, you ask the court, I want it revoked, or I want a fine of 7 days. It's a rare, I'm sure it would be a very rare occurrence. This is not a party town,
Right.
this is not Newport, this is
Right.
not.
it's also after 3 citations.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, it's a carrot and stick approach.
Yeah.
It's,
That's the nuclear option right
it's
there.
like anybody in this room will tell you, you know, you go and run a stop sign, Tiverton policeman catches you, he gives you a warning.
I never get the warning.
2 days later, 2 days later, you're running stop signs again. Whereas, if you got a $150 fine, you probably think about it the next few times you come to a stop sign, which is what this is designed to do.
We don't need to be given.
Cruise control doesn't help with stop signs.
It doesn't stop at stop signs.
I don't like it, but that's only one.
We can think about it, we'll flag it, think of some other.
Okay.
We'll give you a comparison of what other towns do.
Anybody have anything else? Then we have the list. Oh, the list of things. Thank you, I forgot all about that page.
Well, my only thing on this is, I think we should address maximum occupancy for a property on here, which is generally based on bedrooms. And generally, they say 2 people per bedroom, and a person's somebody over 12 years old.
So I would, my view, depending on what part of town you're in, is it should be limited to your ISDS capacity.
Well, I was gonna say, the other part of that then is, there are properties in town where their septic system is limiting what they can do at that property. Among other things, they may have to pump it twice a year, those kinds of things, which sort of puts a limit on what you can do.
Well, and so what of those areas in town that have sewers?
Well, we don't regulate those.
There's bedrooms.
But
But
you're,
again, you would limit it by bedroom.
okay. But is it accurate what,
No, that's not accurate.
No.
Because now, he's worried about pumping it out and overdoing a septic system, and if they got sewage, what does that have to do with anything?
well, you have to
Bedrooms,
define the number.
habitation of bedrooms is generally defined as 2 people per bedroom over 12 years old.
But that's for a septic system.
No.
That's
But
for sewerage
The
too.
house is designed for that prior to sewers were put in probably. So that's, and then when
So we
sewers
really
did come
didn't do
along, your parking is gonna be limited to the size of your property.
Well, yeah.
So here's my rationale from my perspective, Donna, and I think we have to figure out a maximum occupancy number somehow. So if, I'm gonna take as accurate your statement, because I have no way to verify it, so I trust you, that occupancy is anybody 12 or older, you said, right? So I'm gonna bring my Boy Scout troop. 30, or actually, that would probably be Cub Scouts. I'm gonna bring my Cub Scout troop, 30 kids. They're gonna put them in 3 bedrooms.
That's a problem.
Well, so I don't know how we get to that, but.
Yeah, I think that's,
It'll be one car, it'll be a bus.
There you go.
So, yeah, we do have to work on that. We would have to come up with something reasonable that would work.
There's also the issue of.
I don't know how you really enforce, I'm sorry, I don't know how you enforce that either, right?
Probably.
So,
It's
you-
unenforceable.
Unless it's a complaint.
And it's
Unless there's a complaint, unless there's a
micromanaging.
complaint.
Well, I do think that if they are on ISDS, we have to limit it, just like we do
Right, you're limited for the capacity
for
of
the
the house.
capacity of the house.
You may limit it, but it's unenforceable, right? what do you do? So the remedy is they overflow the septic system, the owner has to pump it out, right? That's, I don't know, I think that's why we kind of left that out. It's very hard to enforce.
Well, you do have
Yeah,
ISDS.
I mean, how do you do it? And you go and check and spot
Right.
check and hide them in the closet?
It would only become an issue if it's a complaint, right?
Right. I think that the more important is the off-street parking, because that's where we've had complaints that people could not park in front of their own home because the rental next door was using that spot.
Well, who says it's their spot? It's a public road.
It's right in front of their house, though,
But
Donna.
you don't own the front of your house, because you don't.
But if you come home from work
Yeah.
and you cannot park on your street because every spot is taken.
And I've had that happen. I don't own the street.
Okay, listen, in Tiverton zoning, and I haven't got it marked. Or,
Does it say you own the
well,
street?
anyway. And what Portsmouth does is, they say you gotta have so much off-street parking.
Mhm.
Portsmouth says, I believe it's one car, one bedroom. They also say if there's not enough off-street parking, then you can park on the street within the frontage area of that
Yeah.
dwelling.
Well, we've got problems on lots
Well,
of streets from what I see
okay.
now.
So that prevents, or should help limit the idea of 8 people rent a house together, they show up with 8 cars, and they take up the whole street. We can do this and sort of limit that kind of activity. I mean, in North Tiverton, most people, you know, they put 1 car in the driveway and 1 car in the street.
Depends on if you have a garage.
Well, we're not all that.
Or a
well.
cutout.
No, but
You know, I don't think we would put
can
the
address
actual,
parking.
I don't think we should actually, this is just to give you discussion points, I don't think we should actually put the application in ordinance, because I want to give the flexibility for the zoning person to
Yeah.
be able to change it, but this is just to have a discussion. But I do think, I've heard loud and clear that parking is an issue, we'll look at how to address the parking.
Articulate
I think
parking.
that's probably the best way you're gonna limit the number of people.
Yeah.
Just with the number of cars that you're allowed. We'll look at that. I mean, obviously, if the owner is sharing the house or lives on the same, you know, they have an interest in making sure that, the adequate parking, so.
Send those back to John.
Thank you.
Thank you. You all set?
I am.
Okay, Nicole, you all set? I'll let him speak for you. Everybody else all set here? And thank you all for the great input. And again, so we'll come back. When do you think we should put this on for another
I'm looking
review?
at Nicole, but probably September, maybe the second meeting in September.
Okay,
We will try for the first.
13th is the first, the 27th is the second,
The first one is the September 13th,
right.
and then the second one is September 27th.
And then we have a
27th.
special one on the 20th.
We have a lot of public
so-
hearings on the 13th.
Right, so
We'll do the 27th.
let's do the 27th for now.
We have something
So
on
we
the
intend to have this come back
20th
to us
special.
on the 27th. I can't speak for Denise, but we've heard a lot of input. What I'd ask if, for those who have come tonight and look at the ordinance, if you have new input, certainly let us know. If it's the same information, we've heard it. We're not trying to downplay it or anything like that. We're trying to balance, different perspectives, and we'll do our best in trying to balance those. And then we may not even finalize it then. We may tell Mike and Nicole to go off again and modify a few things. And at some point, we'll have something that we'll submit to the planning board for their review and recommendations. And we'll have our own set of public hearings with a more final type draft. So this still is a work in progress, so folks know. Is anybody here, just so I know, I don't think so, because I don't think it's controversial, I hope not, for the sighting of the electric pole at Fogland Beach?
No, we can't have
Okay.
Rick was here for that.
Well, I know Rick is, but.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. This was our,
Thank you.
this was our biggest attendance
I
we've had
didn't realize Rick was there.
since returning live, so it was really nice to have people. Thank you.
You all gave great input.
So Rick, thank you, and this time you didn't have to walk in the rain?
Yes, thank you.
Did you drown the other night on the way home?
It's a little bit wet, but
But-
that's okay.
I want to know, did you sing in the rain?
No.
Or soap next time.
So yes, this request, Mike and everybody else, is related to a request by the town to have electricity at the Fogland Beach guard shack.
Talking to the mic, we got competition.
Yes, this request is related to the town's request to have National Grid supply electricity to the guard shack at Fogland Beach. DPW has no objection to it, and in fact, thanks National Grid for their efforts to put electricity at the guard shack.
So this is no cost to us? It's just approving?
Well, we don't know that yet.
We don't know that yet,
Well,
okay.
there will be a cost to get electricity to it. Yeah, we're
But
gonna
the
have to-
actual siting of the pole?
The siting of the pole, to my knowledge, has no cost to the town. They install the pole and the leads to it.
Okay. But
That's my
then
understanding.
The wire from the pole to the
connection point.
connection, okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
to the disconnect.
Just like a house.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
okay.
any juice that we put inside, those wires, et cetera, will
Right.
have to
They're
be
just
paid by the town.
planting another pole running the wire across the road.
Yes.
They'll
So-
put a meter on it.
So
Yes.
before we cite this, actually, you and I have had a number of discussions about moving the
Guard shack.
the guard shack, for a better term, closer to what would be Fogland Road.
Well, there were discussions on that, but the last discussion on that was it's not a good idea at this time because the queue of cars would be backed up onto Fogland Road versus Fogland Point Road. And we didn't want to disrupt the traffic heading down either to the boat ramp or to High Hill Road.
So, Chris, are you suggesting we hold off until we have further discussion on that? Because I know the Recreation Commission has discussed that, and I don't know if Open Space has, but I think there's some discussion with CRMC or DEM or
So
all of those parties.
that's the issue. If we are
Right.
gonna do it, now would be the time to do it.
Right, and I know in the last Recreation Commission meeting I was in, part of the conversation was, do we put in 2 lanes, so to speak? So I think it was so that one, those with season residents with a pass can just drive through, which would reduce the congestion. And then those who are needing to purchase would stop at the shack. So that's, and part of it is because you have to get rid of that dip that's there.
Yep.
Well, if you do that, you have to have the poles required.
Right.
So I just wanted to bring it up now, and I'm not saying you have to have a definitive answer now. Obviously, we can move the poll later if we have to, but that's,
Yes, there have been various,
Do the poll now. Our public safety officials say, do the poll now.
So if I may, as far as the pole is concerned, the pole is bringing power to that area. Without power, there's no security cameras.
Ah.
So we can connect the power to the shack.
Do the poll now.
later. Right, the pole is just a single pole to bring power to that area. I could actually put the camera on the pole until a decision is made about the shack.
And the-
Then we can bring, if you wanna move it up, destroy the shack, keep the shack, then we can bring power to the shack.
And they'll allow you to put the camera on the pole? Okay.
Yeah.
So, do I have a motion to approve the petition from National Grid to put a pole at Fogland Beach in the appropriate location of Fogland Beach?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second it.
Okay, who moved it?
I seconded it.
I'll give it to Bill. Bill moved, Donna seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None? Unanimous?
thank you all, and thank you,
Thank you,
Chief
Rick.
Jones.
Thank you, sir.
And I
5
think,
minutes of fame and now you're gone after 3 hours.
that was quick.
I think that is all for tonight. Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second?
Joe isn't here.
Deb, Bill, all those in favor?